A vast map reveals the Dark Forest, a mysterious boundary forged by the ancient war of the dragon gods. This natural barrier, steeped in legend, still separates the descendants who once vied for dominion. The land remains a graveyard for those who dare to trespass, a grim reminder of the war's relentless terror. Peace was finally restored by a legendary warrior, a brave descendant of the dragon clan who rose from the chaos. When the famed blonde warrior, Princess Alferia, finally returned to her waiting subjects, the entire kingdom erupted in cheers. Grand festivities brought the streets to life, while a majestic white creature soared through the clear blue sky. The citizens marveled at the princess's valor, their voices joining in a collective praise of her incredible feat of survival. The shadow of past doubts still lingered, a reminder of the many voices that had predicted her certain demise in the perilous forest. Rumors had accused the blonde princess of cowardice, claiming she had fled the empire under the pretense of a mission. Those who had once mocked her were now silent, as a brown-haired man noted with delight her triumphant and irrefutable success. With a heavy thud, the princess arrived, her return heralding a new era for the expectant kingdom. A figure in an ornate, dark robe watched the celebration, the intricate patterns reflecting a high station. The black-haired man offered his warm congratulations, his calm gaze meeting the princess's upon his return. The princess gazed firmly and gracefully toward the horizon, surrounded by falling petals and the remnants of her journey. Caustic insults echoed in her memory as the blonde girl, Saria, glared at the source of the cruel rumors. The villagers gossiped about Saria, whose name literally meant covered in dust, a title befitting her station. Saria sighed deeply, reflecting on her difficult life as a lowly serf under the scrutinizing gaze of the village. Cruel whispers followed her, as others predicted a miserable future for her, believing her only value lay in her appearance. The oppressive darkness emphasized the weight of the Baron's command, a shadow that had haunted her for years. While other families struggled to survive on thin gruel, her family was permitted to hunt, sparking quiet resentment among the neighbors. The meager bowl of porridge highlighted this disparity, causing her family to be despised by the starving villagers. At the age of 10, Saria found her only solace while wandering the tranquil sanctuary of the deep forest. A sharp thump came from a wooden door, and she called out for the familiar presence of her neighbor. With a rhythmic click, the door opened to reveal Yevon's surprised face as he greeted the young girl. Yevon feigned comical anger, chiding Saria for her lack of manners when mentioning his wife, Galen. Saria teased him with a bright laugh, causing Yevon's shoulders to slump in mock frustration as he gave up the argument. She proudly presented her basket, explaining that she intended to pick berries and blackcurrants in the nearby woods today. Yevon paused to consider her plan, his expression shifting to one of genuine concern for the little girl's safety. He warned her of hidden dangers, specifically advising her to keep a sharp eye out for snakes in the undergrowth. Saria paused with a question, her curious gaze fixed on the older man as they stood outside his home. A look of shock crossed her face as she processed the idea of learning archery from her experienced friend. Yevon explained his concern about wild boars and revealed he had the perfect wood to make a bow for her. He offered to craft a custom weapon just for her, encouraging the young girl to consider learning to hunt. Saria considered the possibility, recalling her father's use of traps and wondering if she could truly master a bow. Yevon advised her not to rush the decision, reminding her to consult her parents before embarking on such a task. She gazed out at the sun-drenched forest, and the dream of having her own bow began to take firm root. The thought of a free, high-quality bow filled her with excitement, making the arduous training seem well worth it. Her face lit up with a smile, thrilled at the prospect of owning something so precious and rare in her life. She let out a loud cheer, eager to finish her work and share the news with her parents. With the soft sound of picking, she tasted a sweet berry, letting out a satisfied munch as she wished she could afford such a treat every day. She looked down at her empty basket, realizing she had spent too much time daydreaming instead of working. With a quick rustle, she redoubled her efforts, frantically filling her basket so she could finally go home. A sudden rustling sound startled her, and her keen senses made her wonder if her own excitement was playing tricks on her. A rhythmic shaking in the dense foliage caught her attention, causing her to freeze as she searched for the source. A chilling wind blew past, and she realized something massive was lurking in the bushes just out of sight. A chill ran down her spine as Yevon's warnings about boars and snakes suddenly felt very immediate and terrifying. She trembled in the shadows, her breath catching as she confirmed the presence of an unknown creature nearby. Saria moved with extreme caution, attempting a slow retreat, desperate to avoid drawing the attention of the watching creature. A gray creature leaped through the forest, and with a sharp whoosh, the blonde girl, Saria, looked up in shock. Saria sat on the grass, recoiling in pain. With a low growl, she wondered what had just knocked into her from the bushes. The blonde girl squinted against the light, trying to focus her gaze on the small, mysterious figure. It stood nearby. Her bright blue eyes widened in surprise as she came face to face with a small creature that let out a soft cue sound. Encountering a strange beast in the woods, Saria watched as the little gray creature made a playful ha sound. The blonde girl stared at the mysterious beast, her curiosity piqued as she wondered what kind of creature it was. The small beast let out a gentle yo sound as it looked at Saria with its huge, watery blue eyes. Saria was stunned, wondering if the small, winged creature before her was truly a dragon from the legends. Sitting in the sun-drenched forest, the blonde girl contemplated her unexpected encounter with the small gray dragon, her expression skeptical. Saria noted the creature's appearance, finding it far less impressive than the majestic dragons of legend. With a sleepy yawn, the gray beast stretched its small wings, flapping them in defiance of Saria's disappointed assessment. With a rhythmic shake and a scratch, the little beast rolled around, its dull, ash-colored fur seeming unremarkable to Saria. Despite her initial doubts, the blonde girl found herself captivated by the small creature's unusually clear, azure eyes. Narrative text highlights the contrast between the beast's plain appearance and its gem-like eyes that shone under the sky. The little gray dragon sat among blue flowers, its large eyes reflecting an innocent curiosity. Cradling the small beast, Saria realized that while stories said dragons were fearsome, this one was surprisingly cute. Saria smiled warmly, noting how the creature's ashen feathers perfectly matched the literal meaning of her own name. The beast let out a soft cue and a gurgle as the blonde girl held the hungry creature, wondering what it needed. Saria felt a bit dazed, wondering if the creature was hungry, and noticed small stars floating around her in her confusion. As she carried the dragon through the forest, Saria was worried, as she had no idea what dragons ate. Remembering the berry bushes, the blonde girl offered the little beast a ripe, red berry to see if it was interested. The little dragon drew closer, looking curious, and Saria encouraged it to sniff the berry. As she offered it, with a quick pth, the creature spat the berry out, disappointing Saria with its lack of appetite. Saria sighed, while the creature let out a sag sound, resting its head against her in a moment of closeness. A narrative box chronicled Saria's struggle as a lowly serf who lacked the resources to provide meat for her new friend. After Saria asked what it ate, there was a sudden nibble, followed by a gulp and a startled ah as the dragon lightly bit her finger. With a quick lick, Saria reacted in shock, scolding the little dragon for trying to drink her blood. Looking at her hand, the blonde girl was surprised to find no wound where the little dragon had just bitten. Held up in the air, the little gray dragon stared intently at Saria with its big, starry blue eyes, looking very satisfied. The scene shifts back to a house in the village, where warm sunlight shines on the roof of a brick home. With a rhythmic splash, Saria was washing her hands, the water rippling in the sunlight. Saria was lost in thought, her mind returning to the fateful encounter she had just experienced in the forest. An internal burst of thought emphasized her disbelief, as she wondered if her encounter with the dragon was just a dream. With a sudden flash, Saria's bright blue eyes snapped open, pulling her back to reality. With a loud whoosh, Adel warned her daughter that the water was overflowing, startling Saria from her daydream. Kira told Saria to clean up the mess and help in the kitchen, noting her distracted state amidst a rhythmic thumping sound. Saria remained silent, her thoughts still on the little creature she had left behind in the quiet forest. Saria recalled gently holding the beast in the woods and naming it Cisrelia, meaning large blue eyes like dewdrops. With a rhythmic shake, the little beast desperately denied being food when Saria asked a curious question. It shook its head again quickly when it rejected the blonde girl's idea that it was her long-lost mother. Cisrelia stared up with twinkling blue eyes while Saria wondered if they could simply be friends. With a happy sound, the little dragon broke into a wide, toothy grin, clearly delighted by the girl's suggestion. Returning the creature's smile, Saria agreed that they were friends, her blue eyes twinkling with newfound joy. Holding the dragon high, the blonde girl formally introduced herself as Saria, framed against a background of blooming red roses. Adel and Curate discussed the precious bout Yevon had offered to make, finding the bowyer's idea rather odd. Her father warned that the lord would not appreciate a muscular body, which prompted a quick, defensive response from a laughing Saria. Den watched with a look of jealousy, wishing he could learn archery too, while Saria playfully told him to get back to work. Saria's father suggested she just take a few lessons and give up, questioning the need for a serf to learn archery. A determined Saria decided she would learn, seeing the archery lessons as the perfect excuse to go back and see Cisrelia. During the meal, the blonde girl was lost in thought, her curiosity about her new dragon friend continuing to grow. Saria's father explained that dragon knights avoided small villages, adding that it was best to avoid contact with them altogether. A vision of a knight riding a massive, lightning-breathing dragon illustrated his warning about the horrors of war. The father's narration continued over images of a battlefield, explaining that seeing a dragon knight meant the arrival of a great conflict. Saria asked about wild dragons, but her father noted that such knowledge was reserved for high-ranking nobles. The blonde girl was lost in thought, wondering why her new friend Cisrelia was wandering alone in the deep forest. When Saria asked if ash-colored dragons drank blood, her father was skeptical, dismissing it as a ridiculous tale. Saria flinched when her father asked if she was up to something suspicious on her trips to the forest. She quickly shushed Den before he could speak, while her father warned her to be mindful of her social standing. As the village fell into darkness, the family prepared to clean up and go to bed. A soft sigh was heard under the starry sky as the quiet of the night settled over the small village. After such an eventful day, Saria tossed and turned on her straw bed, finding it impossible to sleep. She thought about the opportunity to learn archery, reaching out to touch, reflecting on the days. Surprising opportunities. Lying next to a sleeping Den, Saria wondered if the encounter was fate, but remained grounded by her life as a serf. The blonde girl looked up with wide blue eyes, lost in thought, while her younger brother slept soundly beside her. She reflected on how, until now, her small world had been confined to the village and the forest. Saria realized that today's encounter with the dragon had begun to expand her horizons beyond the life she had ever known. A shimmering vision of a grand city hinted at the wider world Saria was beginning to dream of exploring. The scene shifts to Yevon's house the next morning, where he is preparing to show off his latest wooden creation. Yevon presented the new bow with a proud tada, impressing the blonde girl with his craftsmanship. Saria asked about the type of wood, but Yevon explained that expensive yew wood was too rare for a beginner. He explained that the bow was made of ash wood, and he teased Saria when she responded with a playful hum. Yevon noted that she was still growing and would eventually need a more professional weapon. As she grew taller, Saria let out a strained groan as she struggled to string her new wooden bow. A close-up on her determined blue eyes highlighted her internal doubts about where she truly belonged in the future. A dark premonition shows an older Saria sitting alone in a cobweb-filled room, suggesting a future of domestic servitude. Narrative text reveals her fear of ending up as a servant in charge of a high-ranking lord's bedchamber. Back in the present, Yevon finished stringing the bow and assessed the tension as the morning sun streamed in. Curate encouraged the blonde girl, assuring her that she had potential and just needed more practice to improve. Yevon nodded confidently, ready to begin her first archery lesson. He offered technical advice on using a leather grip, warning that an improper release could lead to painful injuries. The lesson continued in the woods, with Yevon advising her on how to properly widen her stance for stability. As Saria wavered and trembled, letting out an oof sound, her face contorted with the effort of drawing the string. The red-haired Galen appeared on the scene, her sudden presence catching the attention of the bowyer and his student. Galen smiled warmly, watching her husband and Saria absorbed in the girl's first target practice. Galen chided Yevon for discouraging the girl, while Saria let out a nervous laugh as she watched the couple bicker. A series of bounces and pings followed as Saria's first arrow failed miserably, skipping uselessly across the grass. Saria was dazed and embarrassed by her poor performance, her eyes wide as she processed her lack of talent. Galen laughed and let out a playful poof, explaining that an arrow's flight path is an arc that requires a specific feel. A close-up shows a hand holding an arrow, ready for another attempt at the target in the woods. Yevon knelt to demonstrate the proper lifting motion needed to guide the arrow, while Saria watched his movements intently. He reminded her that there were no shortcuts to mastery and that constant practice was the only way to improve. Galen's gentle chuckle made Saria blush with embarrassment as she realized how much she still had to learn. A loud cry of deer echoed through the woods, while Saria noted how well the older couple got along. A small bird took flight from a nearby branch, and the sudden flap of wings startled the blonde girl, drawing her gaze. Saria considered using the bird for target practice, but quickly remembered her father's warning about the dangers of illegal hunting. She recalled the solemn warnings from both her father and Yevon about the harsh punishments for hunting without the Lord's permission. Looking at the sunlit leaves, Saria reminded herself that she wasn't in the woods today to practice archery. Her hand reached into the dense green foliage, searching for something far more important than an archery target. There was a sudden, quick dash as something rushed through the undergrowth toward the waiting blonde girl. With a happy leap, the little gray dragon jumped into Saria's arms, finally reunited with its smiling friend. Saria happily hugged her dragon friend, praising it for being a good boy. With a rhythmic sucking sound, the dragon nibbled on Saria's finger, continuing its habit of drinking her blood. In the sunny clearing, Saria looked at Cisrelia and asked if it was full. Saria let out a tired sigh, a soft ha sound, as she rested on the forest floor. Sitting together, Saria admitted she was confused about Cisrelia's species, noting that even the experienced Yevon had been stumped. The blonde girl pondered the mystery of Cisrelia's ashen feathers and striking blue eyes, details no one else had ever heard of. A vision of a majestic, iridescent dragon hinted at how Saria was comparing her friend to the creatures of legend. Saria shared her imaginative theories with Cisrelia, finding the possibilities of its true identity fascinating. A faint beep was heard as Saria stared intently at the small creature's reacting face. Cisrelia closed its eyes in bliss, surrounded by magical sparkles as it enjoyed Saria's attention. With a happy-o sound, Cisrelia confirmed that it was indeed special, making Saria more curious than ever. Shadows fell across Saria's face as she whispered Cisrelia's name, her mind filled with swirling doubts. With a dull throb and an ache, Saria rubbed her sore shoulder, feeling the strain from her archery practice. Looking exhausted, Saria regretted not heeding Galen's advice about overusing her muscles during training. Saria recalled her parents pushing her to serve the Lord, despite her own desire for a different path. She reflected on the blessing of being noticed by the Lord, questioning the future being forced upon her as an heir. As Saria stood before the grand village architecture, she realized that no one valued her personal wishes. With a loud thwack, Saria's arrow hit the target, earning a cheer of excellent for her teacher, Yevon. Yevon noted Saria's remarkable improvement, though she remained focused on the physical toll of her secret goal. As Saria practiced her archery, she playfully wondered why she hadn't developed any noticeable muscles yet. Yevon watched with a skeptical look, noticing that the blonde girl was disappearing into the woods far too often. The bowyer sternly reminded Saria that hunting without the Lord's permission was a dangerous crime for a serf. Saria flashed a nervous but bright smile, quickly agreeing that she understood the serious risks of illegal hunting. She explained that the quiet of the forest was simply the best place to focus on her archery lessons. Yevon acknowledged her cleverness, but urged her to be extremely careful when wandering the deep woods alone. A year passed, and as news of an unidentified creature in the forest began to circulate in the village, Saria looked back. Peaceful birdsong came from the high branches as Saria returned to the secret meeting spot they once shared. Saria smiled brightly, announcing her arrival to her friend, her eyes filled with the joy of reunion. Saria embraced the now enormous Cisrelia, who had grown to a surprising size over the past year. She gently asked what it had been up to, her bond with the giant beast stronger than ever. Saria reflected on how she had grown accustomed to the dragon's strange habit of drinking her blood for nourishment. The horse-sized Cisrelia licked her hand as the narration chronicled its unusually rapid growth and increasing activity. As Cis hunted more frequently, villagers like Yevon began to notice unsettling signs of a large predator nearby. Saria felt a pang of anxiety, worried that her massive friend would soon be discovered by the village. With the sound of a warm embrace, Saria held Cisrelia, noting that despite its immense size, it still acted like a baby. During their quiet moment, a large teardrop fell with a soft plop, catching Saria completely off guard. A shocked Saria looked up into her friend's eyes, desperate to know what had made it cry. Cisrelia looked down with an expression of deep sorrow, its enormous blue eyes filled with grief. Saria's heart sank as she realized something was seriously wrong with her dragon friend. She frantically asked if she had done something wrong or if it was feeling unwell. In her search for answers, her voice trailed off as she stared at Cisrelia, and a painful realization began to dawn. With a heavy heart, the blonde girl asked if Cisrelia was planning to leave her behind in the forest. The dragon nodded, confirming her fears with a sad motion that made Saria question why they had to part. Saria feared the endless loneliness that would follow if her only true friend disappeared from her small world forever. The forest remained silent, the only home that Cisrelia had ever known since their chance meeting. Saria realized that Cisrelia had outgrown the forest, unable to even stretch its wings among the dense foliage. She understood that its presence was a danger to the village and that it needed the vast wilderness to survive. A vision of distant, rolling mountains highlighted the wild spaces where Cisrelia truly belonged. The dark forest loomed in the distance, beckoning the dragon back to a land where it could soar freely. Faced with the inevitable, Saria accepted what she had long known. Their paths would eventually diverge. With a sudden clench, her knuckles turned white as her hands gripped her clothes in silent frustration. The air was filled with whispers as the silhouettes of the village gossiped, voicing their growing fear and resentment of the blonde girl. With a sudden, comforting nudge, the massive gray dragon nudged Saria, startling her from her dark thoughts. Saria tearfully embraced her enormous friend, desperately asking if its presence could truly mend her broken and fearful heart. She turned away from the forest sanctuary, the falling leaves mirroring the heavy sorrow that weighed on her every step. Walking through the sun-dappled woods, Saria finally accepted the painful reality. It was time to let her friend go. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered a final, heartbreaking goodbye to her beloved companion. Says the majestic, horse-sized dragon looked toward the open sky, finally ready to reclaim its birthright of wild freedom. Looking up at the light filtering through the canopy, Saria reflected on the fateful friendship they had shared. Saria believed that as long as they both held onto the memory of their time together, their bond would endure. She held on to the hope of a future reunion, even as the world around her grew more dangerous and uncertain. With the sound of boots kicking up dirt, there was a sudden, quick dash, signaling an urgent and swift departure from the woods. Saria bolted through the dense foliage, her expression filled with a frantic and desperate need to escape the overwhelming sorrow. A series of gasps followed as Saria breathlessly whispered one last farewell while she ran. Overcome with exhaustion and grief, she collapsed heavily onto the forest floor. Left alone in the silence, her face flushed and her eyes full of tears, Saria cried out a final, anguished farewell to her friend, Cisrelia. A voice calling for help was heard in the distance, while a title card marked a new chapter in Saria's challenging life. The grand crest of the Elian Empire appeared, signaling a shift in focus to the continent's broader political conflicts. Narrative text explained the empire's history of using dragons to dominate its neighbors and its long-standing rivalry with Huron. The two empires' vastly different lineages highlighted the deep-seated animosity and cultural differences that fueled their constant wars. Failed invasion attempts and military struggles illustrated the slow and steady decline of the once mighty Huron Empire. As its rivals faltered, the Elian Empire entered a golden age of prosperity and opulence. Music and laughter filled the empire's ballrooms as nobles enjoyed the stability and wealth of a thriving nation. The Huron Emperor's sudden death, without an heir, plunged his country into a violent and chaotic civil war. A sudden oink was heard as villagers discussed their proximity to the border and their long history of avoiding direct conflict. With rhythmic snorts and oinks, a green-eyed boy shared terrifying rumors about fallen knights and a potential enemy invasion. The boy turned to a now mature Saria, asking in fear what they would do if the war reached their peaceful village. Faced with the looming threat of war, Saria admitted her own uncertainty about the future and her role in it. Looking out over her village at night, an adult Saria clutched her bow, longing for peace yet dreading the inevitable. She clung to a desperate sliver of hope that they could avoid bloodshed. Even as the signs of war drew near, a small, fluffy white rabbit appeared in the woods, marking the quiet passage of time since Cisrelia's departure. With a quick scamper, a now 15-year-old Saria continued to frequent the forest meeting spot they once shared. Now tall and physically mature, Saria reflected on her own growth and the many changes that had occurred over 5 years. Her village friends called out to her, and Saria quickly agreed to join them. As they walked through the woods, Saria paused to look back, a lingering sense of nostalgia for her lost friend, still tugging at her heart. As Saria aged, the village's resentment shifted from her to the greedy and controlling Baron Harper. Narrative text reveals that Saria's maturing beauty only added to the villagers' scorn. For the sake of the Baron's future plans, a strained groan was heard as Saria struggled with a heavy sack, and she noticed the villagers had slowly begun to accept her. The gossip was filled with indignation, emphasizing how cruel it was for the Baron to plan on taking a mistress younger than his own son. Two villagers suddenly offered to help Saria carry her things, shocking her as they insisted she shouldn't be carrying such a heavy burden. The men took the heavy load from her hands, demonstrating the protective kindness the villagers were finally starting to show her. Despite the support from the locals, Saria felt a deepening dread as the day she would be forced to serve the Lord approached. A visual timeline showed Saria's steady growth from a little girl into a tall, capable young woman. A series of piercing screams tore through the night, with shrieks for mercy echoing from the village tower. Saria gripped her bow, watching with wide, terrified eyes as her fears of a violent future finally became reality. In a grand war room, a silver-haired man listened as an armored knight began a strategic briefing over a map. The knight calmly proposed a brutal scorched earth policy, suggesting they burn the outskirts to protect the main territory. Commander Astil of the Harper Knights stood tall, his grim expression reflecting his unwavering loyalty to the Baron's commands. The briefing concluded with a stark warning. Huron soldiers were likely to launch an invasion from the nearby mountains. The aging Baron Harper, seated on his throne, decided to observe before acting on the request for reinforcements. The brown-haired knight, Commander Astil, clad in silver armor, began to report the critical intelligence gathered by his men. High in the castle spires, Huron's growing military vigor posed a threat, making more aggressive defensive preparations necessary. The white-haired Baron let out a strained groan, dismissing the urgency and questioning why they should rush before an actual invasion. With his back to his subordinates, the Baron coldly decided to burn the farmlands only when the enemy came into view. The strategists looked over the mountain maps, questioning how their limited forces should be distributed across the territory. Baron Harper discussed the grim numbers with his purple-haired son, Lancel, noting they had only 50 soldiers and 6 knights. Lancel Harper asked if they could make use of the blonde serf girl known for her exceptional archery. A memory surfaced of Saria performing archery tricks at a Rodan banquet, her talent catching the attention of nobles. The Baron cut the conversation short, warning his son to be extremely cautious when speaking of the girl. A flashback revealed a young, tearful Saria being hidden away, isolated by the Baron's strict private orders. The narration highlighted that the girl's unique blonde hair and blue eyes perfectly matched the noble features of the imperial royal family. The Baron smiled wickedly, gloating about his intention to take the child as his mistress. A stern warning hung in the air, threatening execution for anyone who spoke carelessly of the girl's existence. During the strategy meeting, the Baron was suddenly startled, his expression shifting from arrogance to surprise. A metallic clang was heard as Astel bowed, but the Baron remained stubborn, insisting there was no reason to rush reinforcements. Astel was visibly shocked when the Baron suddenly announced his intention to personally lead troops to Rodan. The commander was left speechless when the Baron ordered him to stay behind and help Lancel guard the castle. Instead, Commander Astel argued they shouldn't divide their weak forces, but the Baron was determined to rendezvous with Rodan. A strategic silhouette depicted the grim reality. Only 30 soldiers would be left to defend the entire Harper territory. The Baron scoffed at the brown-haired commander from behind his desk, calling him too timid for a knight. Astel clarified that his concerns stemmed from loyalty, not fear, as he only wished to protect his lord's lands. The Baron roared at Astel to stop complaining and obey orders, preparing to leave the castle with 2 other knights. Astel, worried by the reckless plan, listened as the Baron confirmed he would be taking 20 of their few remaining soldiers. A final, booming command echoed through the hall, demanding everything be prepared as the Baron instructed. A clenching sound was heard as Astel's gloved hand tightened in silent fury before he yielded to his ruler's reckless command. A sudden, heavy slam on the table caused a nearby official to click his tongue in frustration and shock. Astel looked away in thought, gruffly telling his companion to prepare for the enemy's inevitable arrival. A close-up on Astel's face showed his realization that he had no choice but to follow his lord's firm and dangerous orders. Under the night sky, armored knights stood guard with rhythmic footsteps, their silhouettes illuminated by falling embers. As spears were raised, urgent shouts for the commander were heard, signaling the start of a sudden and violent attack. Multiple heavy footsteps echoed as a soldier cried out in alarm, confirming the enemy had finally breached the border. Heavy footsteps moved through the darkness, accompanied by floating golden-yellow petals. The camera focused on the armored boots of the advancing army as a soldier estimated the enemy forces numbered close to 1,000. Lancel Harper admitted he should have listened to Astel, shocked that the enemy would attack the very moment his father left. As villagers began to seek refuge within the castle's stone walls, Lancel demanded a full report on their remaining forces. Commander Astel gazed grimly into the distance, knowing they had to prepare immediately for a battle where they were vastly outnumbered. Faced with the imminent threat, the knights considered the desperate measure of conscripting serfs to bolster their thin ranks. Lancel pointed down the line, roaring at a nervous soldier to ensure everyone was prepared for the coming conflict. A faint grumble was heard as Lancel walked away, leaving Astel to contemplate their survival in the quiet dusk. A rhythmic thud was suddenly heard as Lord Lancel called out to Saria, who was carrying a heavy basket of supplies. Lancel explained he had summoned the blonde girl for her exceptional archery, which was now vital to the castle's defense. In a close-up of Lancel's gloved hand, he promised Saria she would become a freeman if she fought in the battle. Saria was stunned by the offer, her heart racing at the thought of gaining the same status as Mr. Yevon. She mentioned her upcoming birthday, worried about the Baron's plan to force her to become his mistress later in the year. Lancel sighed wearily, musing aloud with a grim tone about how much longer his aging father would even live to carry out such a plan. Lancel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, promising to take full responsibility for her future if she joined the fight. With steely resolve, Saria agreed to the deal, choosing the battlefield over the Baron's predatory plans. With renewed hope, Saria looked up, wondering if this path could truly free her from the fate of becoming the Lord's mistress. A flashback showed a boy named Din complaining about heavy stones, a contrast to the hard labor of building the castle moat. The narration captured the heavy anxiety of watching the fields, waiting for the enemy's inevitable arrival. In a tight close-up, Saria's wide blue eyes reflected her inner turmoil as she anticipated the coming conflict. Saria looked down from the ramparts at Mr. Yevon, who had brought a message from the Knight Commander. Against the brilliant sunset, Mr. Yevon shared his uncertainty about how this looming battle would ultimately unfold. Mr. Yevon stretched his tired limbs, admitting that despite his confidence in her, he was reluctant to send a child to fight. Saria managed a tense, sweat-beaded smile, her expression betraying the immense pressure of her new, deadly responsibility. Saria noticed the village soldiers preparing their weapons and asked if they were about to leave the safety of the castle. Mr. Yevon looked out over the territory, explaining the necessity of burning their hard-earned crops to cut off the enemy's resources. Saria's apprehension deepened when Mr. Yevon revealed he could already see the enemy forces and urged her to stay safe. Mr. Yevon gently patted Saria's head, explaining that the freedom Lord Lancel offered came with the risk of sudden death. A close-up on his hand showed him reminding her of a harsh reality. Killing is far easier than many imagine. With a determined look, Saria silently promised to remember his heavy words in the trials to come. Waving a final farewell, Mr. Yevon led a small scouting party away, promising to return to Saria soon. A dark memory of blood-stained eyes suddenly surfaced, foreshadowing a tragic turn in the mission's outcome. A messenger named Nasir, IKA, arrived, delivering a cold declaration from the descendants of the demon god Saladin IV. The messenger stood with his back to the castle, offering hollow condolences to the young Lord Lancel. The knight in purple armor calmly explained that they had encountered the Baron's small force and killed him in battle. Saria watched in horror as the enemy messenger offered to return the bodies of the Baron and his knights. Saria stared in shock, her heart breaking as she realized the ceasefire was only for them to retrieve their dead. The cart brought back the bloodied body of Mr. Yevon, who had been mercilessly cut down while performing his duty. Lord Lancel and his retainers looked away in grief, reacting to the news of the Baron's death and the demand for surrender. Tying back his purple hair, Lord Lancel asked if anyone was brave enough to leave the safety of the walls. Commander Astel watched with a somber expression, preparing to state the gravity of their situation. Breaking the heavy silence, Saria bravely stepped forward, volunteering to go outside and retrieve the fallen. Though tears streamed down her face, Saria's expression was filled with a new, fiery determination to honor her friend. Commander Astel roared at the hesitant soldiers, shaming them for letting a child lead the charge into danger. A close-up on Astel's face showed him recalling the first time he saw her, marveling at the strength she displayed now. Saria's small figure stood among the tall, armored knights, her intense gaze surprising the battle-hardened commander. Looking at the girl's profile, Astel wondered if the harsh reality of war had fundamentally changed her outlook on life. A rhythmic creak was heard as a wooden cart, carrying the heavy burden of the dead, made its way across the stone courtyard. Distant enemy soldiers jeered and taunted the foreign army for relying on a child to fight their battles. A sharp whoosh was heard as an arrow narrowly missed Commander Astel, prompting him to shout a warning to his men. The foreign army was enraged by the enemy's bold and mocking attempt at intimidation. A wave of laughter came from the enemy lines, prompting Commander Astel to demand swift and decisive retaliation. Saria pointed toward the distant enemy camp, confidently claiming she could hit the soldier who had just mocked them. Commander Astel stared at her in pure disbelief, stunned by her claim of such an incredible range. Looking at the target 300 yards away, Saria focused her blue eyes and insisted she could make the shot. A steady drawing sound was heard as Saria pulled back her bow, while the commander suggested she aim for the flag instead. Astel realized hitting the flag would silence the enemy and prove she was a threat to their commander. The narration reflected on the cold impartiality of death, stating it would claim the lives of nobles and serfs without hesitation. A solid thud was heard as Saria's arrow struck true, perfectly hitting the distant target and sending a grim message. Watching the arrow land, the knights stood silently as Saria felt the heavy toll of her first kill. A great cheer erupted from the ramparts as the soldiers celebrated Saria's incredible feat of marksmanship. Saria reached out to touch the wooden cart, whispering a final, heartbroken farewell to her sacrificed mentor. Under the twilight sky, Saria stood alone by the cart mourning Mr. Yevon, her innocence lost to war. The castle stood silent as the hooting of owls was heard, and word of Saria's deeds spread through the night. Late at night, Commander Astel leaned against the stone wall, defending the decision to conscript Saria by citing their severely diminished numbers. Astel clenched his armored hand, recalling her brilliant performance at the banquet and knowing they needed her skills. Astel spoke to the scout instructor, expressing complete confidence in his assessment of the girl's archery talent. The green-robed instructor remained silent, his stoic expression reflecting the heavy burden of training a child for war. The green-robed instructor voiced his concern, noting Saria was far too young for such horrors. Standing on the moonlit battlements, the instructor warned Lord Lancel that sending an untested child into war was reckless. Lancel gazed melancholically at the horizon, admitting that no one would be safe if the castle's defenses were breached. A tight close-up on the instructor's eyes captured his silent doubt about the young girl's chances of survival. Against a backdrop of wilting flowers, the narration reflected on how the coming bloodshed would be unbearable even for adults. The instructor clutched his chest, lamenting the inevitable mass casualties that would soon stain their lands red. In a somber corner, a red-haired woman wondered aloud if a child could withstand such trauma. Rain-like lines emphasized the gravity of the woman's question as she worried for Saria's fragile mental state. Saria looked down at the blood-stained courtyard, standing near the fallen as the narration focused on her inner torment. A maid brought a platter of sausages, urging the weary villagers to eat something before the enemy arrived. Despite his hunger, a soldier complained about the foul smell of the rations while Saria watched from the shadows. Saria stared blankly at the small piece of meat in her hand, the weight of her grief suppressing her appetite. A close-up on Saria's vibrant blue eyes showed her reflecting on the meager reward for surviving such a harrowing ordeal. In a moment of silent pain, she closed her eyes, feeling the emptiness of her current situation. Huddled by a stone wall, Mr. Yevon's widow wept, asking Saria why her husband hadn't returned. The grieving woman reminded Saria that she was the one who had undertaken the grim task of retrieving the bodies. Beads of sweat rolled down Saria's face as she struggled to find the words to comfort the heartbroken widow. Under the weight of the woman's grief, Saria trembled and tried to speak, only to find herself voiceless. Looking out over the village, the narration revealed the painful truth. Mr. Yevon had never truly become a freeman. Tears streamed down the widow's face as she mentioned the shared social status of Saria and her late husband. A single tear fell from the woman's green eye as she lamented their status as serfs born in this forsaken land. The widow looked at the blonde girl, explaining that their station left them no choice but to be involved. During the widow's tirade against the war, a sharp crunch was suddenly heard as an armored boot stepped on Saria's food. Startled by the sudden intrusion, Saria let out a small gasp as she looked up in shock. Lord Lancel jumped back in comical alarm, realizing he had accidentally crushed the girl's dinner. Flustered and sweating, Lancel hurried to apologize, though Saria insisted she had dropped it herself. Straightening his silver armor, he formally announced that he was now Lord Harper, taking on the heavy responsibilities of his late father. Looking up at the castle tower, Harper admitted he had yet to inherit the title, but the transition was now inevitable. Saria stared at the young lord with wide, curious eyes, wondering why he had come to her now. With a soft jingle, Harper opened his palm to reveal 3 gold coins, intended as payment or a reward. Stunned by the sudden wealth, Saria took the gold coins with a trembling hand, her expression one of utter disbelief. Abstract shapes represented the looming threat, as the narration noted the enemy was taking their time to eat. Though the money was enough to feed her family for weeks, a sense of nausea clouded Saria's spirit. The blonde girl stood with her back to the world, contemplating the heavy price of the gold in her hands. Against a backdrop of stars, Lord Harper cheerfully encouraged Saria to do her best in the next battle. The mood shifted instantly when Lord Harper was informed that the Heron soldiers were finally advancing their formation. Harper's face tensed with sudden anxiety as he realized the enemy was preparing to attack much sooner than expected. The massive stone gate stood as the last barrier between the village and the approaching Imperial army. Harper raised a steel gauntlet fist, declaring the start of all-out war as the archers above drew their bows. The booming command to fire echoed across the battlements as the first volley of arrows was launched. Saria watched from the ramparts as a deadly rain of rockets lit up the twilight sky like meteors. Her blue eyes reflected the flickering orange light as she recognized the projectiles as the Heron Empire's signature rockets. A booming explosion was heard as a soldier was hit, and the narration warned that these flames could not be extinguished. Horrified screams filled the air as Saria realized the brutal reality of war had finally arrived in full force. Sparks flew past her face as Saria remembered Mr. Yevon's warning that the flames would eventually consume her too. Staring into the chaos, she wondered with a numb heart how taking a life could be so unsettlingly easy. A sharp call snapped her back to reality, and she looked at her commander. The commander pointed to the approaching enemy knights, stressing that they were the primary threat that had to be eliminated. The commander stood at the edge, explaining that standard arrows could never penetrate the knights' heavy steel plates. Turning to the young archer, the commander asked if she was capable of taking them out before they arrived. With a rhythmic drawing sound, Saria pulled back her bow, noting that as a serf, she had never used steel arrows. A close-up on the girl's determined face showed her contemplating the unique advantages of using simpler, stone-tipped arrows in battle. Aiming at the distant cavalry, Saria acknowledged that while stone lacked the destructive power of steel, it had its uses. A loud crack was suddenly heard as Saria's arrow hit its mark, proving that stone could still be lethal against an armored foe. A choked scream was heard as a knight was hit, the force of the arrow knocking him from his horse. Cheers filled the air as the soldiers celebrated Saria's incredible feat of taking down an imperial heavy knight. Saria looked down from the stone battlements, standing silently as her expression was clouded by the harsh reality of her first kill. Shouts to push ladders and throw stones echoed across the walls as the foreign army struggled to repel the invaders. Behind Saria, desperate commands to pour boiling water on the imperial soldiers were heard as the castle's defenses began to crumble. Floating in a dark, misty void, Saria called out for her parents in confusion. Searching for her family and haunted by her actions, the young girl wondered why she had to die in a foreign land simply for following orders. A ghostly, brown-haired knight in silver plate armor reached out, demanding Saria tell him why he had to die. Tears streamed from the fallen knight's eyes as he questioned the girl who had ended his life with an arrow on the battlefield. Saria stumbled backward as the ghost asked why she had chosen to shoot him during the siege. A clatter was suddenly heard as Saria defended her actions, crying out that she was only following Commander Astel's direct orders. Commander Astel looked down at the cowering girl, asking what it felt like for Saria to finally feel the weight of war. Astel looked out at the burning horizon, lamenting how terrifyingly easy it was for humans to kill each other in conflict. The commander explained that some kill for personal gain, while others are forced to follow orders. Astel turned, suggesting that everyone's life is bound to something that dictates their cruelest and most difficult choices. The narration reflected on how adults, after experiencing such horrific trauma, build strong inner walls to protect their true selves. Walking past the commander, Saria wondered aloud if any trace of her existence would remain in the world after she died. Saria called out for Mr. Yevon, while Astel lamented exposing such a young girl to the horrors of the world. A hand reached for a framed memory photo of Yevon and Saria, a final plea to survive and find true freedom. A flash of light suddenly lit up the night as a soldier screamed a warning of the the Empire's devastating surprise attack. Panic erupted as the enemy stormed the castle, with desperate voices urging everyone to flee for their lives immediately. Surrounded by leaping flames, Saria watched the collapsing tower in shock, wondering how the castle's defenses could have failed so completely. Saria rushed to Commander Astil, anxiously asking how the Heron soldiers had bypassed their frontline defenses in the night. Astil revealed the enemy's trick, explaining they had used the river to sneak in through the back gate and bypass the guards. Looking at the burning ruins, the commander somberly speculated that the guards at the back gate were the first victims of the breach. Astil's gaze softened. Astil thanked Saria, acknowledging that her earlier success had bought them a crucial head start against the invaders. Recalling Mr. Yevon's dying wish, the commander reflected on his inner conflict over involving a child in a hopeless war. Astil admitted he had believed everyone capable had to fight to save the masses, even if they faced a crushing defeat. The commander drew his sword and stood in the fire, giving the final, heartbreaking order for Saria to run. The young girl cried out in anguish, listening as her superior insisted there was no point in sacrificing her life in this pointless battle. A sharp clenching sound was heard as Astil urged Saria to find her family and flee the castle before it was too late. A sudden dashing sound was heard as Saria's feet pushed off the stone floor, beginning her desperate escape through the burning castle. Chaos spread with shouts that the enemy had breached the main keep and Lord Lancel was among the dead. Desperate cries filled the smoke-filled air as survivors scrambled for their lives. Realizing their resistance had finally come to an end, running through the flames, Saria realized that escaping meant she might never see Astil or Mr. Yevon again. A sudden halt was heard as Saria faced the armored knights, wondering who would remember the fallen if she didn't survive. The imperial soldiers spotted Saria, recognizing her as the deadly archer who had caused them so much grief from the battlements. The knights charged the small girl, their angry shouts marking her as their primary target in the burning courtyard. A quick rolling sound was heard as Saria narrowly dodged a blow, her blue eyes wide with adrenaline-fueled fear and desperation. A heavy grasping sound was heard as an iron-like hand seized the girl's arm, the knight smirking as he stopped her escape. A sharp slashing sound was heard as Saria fought back with a small knife, driven by a powerful, primal instinct to survive. Saria slipped from the tall knight's grasp, leaving them frustrated in the chaos of the courtyard. She ran for the outer wall. The blonde girl's heart pounded with the single, frantic thought of avoiding a gruesome death. Reaching the edge of the stone wall, Saria hesitated for a moment as the knights realized she had nowhere to go but down. In a final, desperate act of survival, Saria leaped from the towering castle battlements into the dark abyss of the night. The scene faded into an abstract, deep blue void as the girl fell toward her uncertain and terrifying fate. Her world went dark, Saria's face taut as she faced an overwhelming, heavy emptiness. It was reported that a massive guardian dragon appeared against the starry sky, annihilating the enemy army in a single blow. Kyle Elian stood proudly in a red cape, responding to a knight's address as he prepared to speak to his subjects. The blonde-crowned Prince Kyle Elian declared divine protection, gloating that the dragon's appearance proved the righteousness of his empire. A weary knight reminded the crown prince of the heavy casualties suffered during the recent capture of the guardian dragon. Behind heavy iron bars, the majestic white-feathered dragon was imprisoned, its beauty drawing gasps of awe from its captors. Appearing among blue flowers was Interayon Magadan, the king's illegitimate son, his blue eyes reflecting uncertainty under the vast night sky. There was talk of Heron halting its advance and the looming threat of a surprise attack. The brown-haired commander, Astil, urged Interayon not to overexert himself, while hoping the crown prince would succeed in taming the dragon. Commander Astil frowned, noting that the crown prince's arrogance had worsened since the guardian dragon's appearance at Castle Harper. Looking at the castle, the commander explained that a successful pact would end the crown prince's paranoid suspicions of Interayon. A close-up on Interion's sharp blue eyes revealed his deep suspicion about the sudden appearance of a masterless guardian dragon. Walking past fresh bloodstains on the floor, The narrator questioned how the crown prince could expect to tame a wild dragon. After a failed attempt at control, Kal-Elian stormed out of the castle, cursing in anger. Two knights broke into a cold sweat as the crown prince demanded to know why the dragon refused his blood. Crown Prince Kal-Elian arrogantly declared that the dragon had chosen him, proving the purity of his royal bloodline. And Tyrion's expression turned serious, suspecting the crown prince might have a fatal misunderstanding of the dragon. The atmosphere in the castle grew increasingly tense and uneasy as the dragon once again rejected the crown prince's blood. Commander Astel warned in a low voice that a guardian dragon that could not be tamed could become the Empire's greatest threat. The knights behind him were whispering, talking about the dragon's fury and how the crown prince had nearly lost a hand in the encounter. Kal-Elian stopped in his tracks when he realized his men were discussing him, and his icy gaze changed. The crown prince turned with a threatening look, questioning the terrified knights for daring to mock him in his presence. The crown prince loomed over them like an ominous shadow, threatening to strip them of their knightly titles while they pleaded in vain. As Kal-Elian turned to a new disturbance, a vein throbbed on his face, his patience worn dangerously thin. The sacred texts explained that the Antisistria were sacred guardians who drew power only from the blood of royalty. The narration emphasized that it was an inevitable destiny for the dragon to form a pact with a member of the royal family. As the crown prince continued his retreat from the dragon's cage, another damn had echoed through the corridor. The blond man soothed his bruised ego, wondering why he had been rejected by the one creature he needed. Kal-Elian's eyes filled with cold resolve, deciding that an uncooperative dragon deserved to be destroyed. Deep within the castle, a group of prisoners was revealed, with the blonde Saria bound and kneeling on the ground. Saria wearily lowered her head as someone called for Sir Marion among a group of captured serfs. Kal-Elian looked down on the captives with a sneer of utter disgust, questioning what this filth was. A knight explained that they were escaped serfs captured on the riverbank during the chaos of the retreat. The crown prince stood over her condescendingly, declaring that the presence of such a wretched commoner in his chambers made him physically ill. With a sharp Kal-Elian roughly grabbed Saria's blonde hair, cruelly yanking her head back. When the crown prince saw Saria's blonde hair and blue eyes up close, his expression turned to murderous shock. Kal-Elian explained that these specific features were a symbol of dragon's blood, exclusive to legitimate members of the royal family. Saria's heart stopped as the crown prince announced that anyone outside the royal bloodline possessing these features was a traitor. A blood-red background framed the cruel reality. Imperial law dictated that anyone born with these features must be executed immediately. Saria trembled in fear, trying to protest, but her voice was faint, just a desperate whisper followed by tears of shock. The girl cried out that no one had ever told her that her appearance was a crime against the royal family. Saria recalled her time as a soldier, pleading that her service to Elian should earn her something more valuable than death. Haunted by visions of her family, the blonde girl begged the indifferent crown prince for mercy. Kal-Elian looked back with cold, empty eyes, deeming her service irrelevant to the crime of her existence. The knights watched nervously as the crown prince's hysteria flared up again, muttering that they should pretend not to see his cruelty. The crown prince imperiously raised his voice, issuing an order to a nearby soldier, who immediately obeyed in fear. With her back to her doom, Saria heard the crown prince's horrifying command to feed her to the dragon. With a sickening sneer, Kal-Elian ordered the knights to gouge out her eyes before imprisoning her forever. A knight's protest was met with a roar from the crown prince, who demanded absolute obedience to his decree. Saria felt despair, wondering what she had done to deserve such cruelty. The crown prince walked away from her suffering, ignoring the girl's desperate pleas for mercy as the executioner prepared to carry out his orders. Desperate screams of no and stop filled the air as the screen faded to a dark and bloodstained scene. With a sudden Saria's world plunged into darkness, her pained cries echoing the loss of her sight. Her face covered in blood and clutched in her hands, Saria begged for mercy while the knights hesitated in grim silence. One knight dismissed Saria's pain, claiming there was nothing they could do now. Looking at her bloodstained hair, the soldier concluded she was beyond saving. After the order was given, the bound and heartbroken blonde girl hung her head in the darkness. In the oppressive shadows of the prison, a sharp laugh escaped, and Saria found a final, bitter shred of defiance in her wounded soul. The girl laughed weakly, reflecting on her desperate and now seemingly futile struggle for survival. Saria lamented that from the moment of her birth, she was doomed to a cruel and inevitable death. In the flickering void, only one lingering question remained. What exactly was the purpose of her survival? The narration shifted to the dragon, addressing the mighty guardian seated in its stone cage. The story recalled a past bond with the dragon, who was once a cherished friend. Although this friend had departed for greater realms, its sweet and wise nature remained etched in memory. A flashback showed a young Saria caring for a small, gray dragon in the warmth of lush greenery. The small dragon smiled warmly, reflecting the kindness and wisdom Saria had shown it during her childhood. In the present, the majestic white dragon sat silently in its cold, dark, stone-walled prison. With a sudden flash, Saria was pulled back from the darkness by a voice calling her name. Shocked to be alive, Saria stared at her hands, realizing her sight had miraculously returned. The girl was stunned to find her wounds healed, just as the white dragon acknowledged her presence in the cell. The white dragon looked down with a gentle gaze, recognizing the blonde girl as its true friend. The creature radiated affection, expressing how deeply it had missed her during their long and painful separation. Saria's eyes widened as she looked up in amazement, hardly able to believe that this majestic creature before her was her companion. The dragon called out her name, Cisrelia, connecting their innocent past with this dark present. With a warm embrace, Saria clung tightly to the massive dragon, pouring out her tears to her friend, Cis. Finally reunited, the two shared deep emotional comfort and joy in the dungeon. Cis noted how much she had grown, praising her beauty as they reconnected. After years of separation, Saria wiped away her tears and smiled, asking what had finally brought her old friend back to her. The dragon revealed that it sensed her life was in grave danger and had rushed across realms to her side. Cis explained that it had initially searched for her in her old village, only to find it consumed by the fires of war. Burning with protective rage, the dragon admitted that it had destroyed everything in sight while desperately searching for her. Saria clarified that she had already fled into the river to escape the enemy before the dragon arrived. She recounted how she was captured and brought here as a serf, which led to her current predicament and suffering. Cis nuzzled her affectionately, expressing deep and sorrowful regret for not arriving sooner to protect her from her suffering. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Saria thanked the dragon for remembering her and arriving in time to rescue her. The girl asked how the dragon had sensed her danger from such a great distance. As she understood the dragon's words, Saria was stunned by the revelation that a dragon's blood and soul could be hidden within a human. Cis observed that Saria had been completely unaware of the significance when she once shared her blood with him. The blonde girl fell into deep thought, beginning to comprehend the hidden royal power flowing through her veins. History revealed that ancient dragons once possessed the divine ability to transform into many different types of creatures. The narration explained that as magic in the world slowly began to disappear forever, the age of dragons withered with it. A golden dragon with noble scales stood, representing the fading glory of that once magical and vibrant era. The first heirs of dragon blood were humans with the dragon's magic flowing directly in their veins. Ancient texts explained how these heirs were originally created to carry the dragon's legacy across time and space. These individuals with dragon souls eventually became the founders of the powerful Elian royal family. Cis playfully used a blackboard to teach Saria about the complex and noble history of her lineage. The dragon prepared to explain the second crucial decision made by the ancient dragon ancestor, Alien Road. Alien Road used its own body to create new dragons that could thrive even without consuming external magic. Cis identified its own race as a product of the dragon ancestor's ancient, life-sustaining transformation. The story concluded that these descendants continued to carry the dragon bloodline into the present world. Cis explained that their shared history is inscribed in the blood of each new generation. Saria realized that her royal-like appearance was the reason crowned Prince Kyle Elian. saw her as a mortal threat. In a serene vision, Saria and her little friend Sis enjoyed pure joy among the flowers. The narration confirmed that their fated reunion marked the final fulfillment of their ancient and sacred pact. Sis explained that Saria's sacrifice of her own blood was the first proof of her worth. As a soft feather drifted down, the dragon acknowledged the purity of her soul as the second requirement. Sis focused on his powerful claws, revealing that only one final step remained to solidify their bond. In the dim cell, the majestic white dragon stood protectively over the petite, blonde girl. Saria remained silent, a bead of sweat trickling down her cheek as she digested the dragon's profound revelations. The blonde girl confessed the darkness she had endured to survive, even admitting to taking lives during the war. Saria reflected on the crown prince's cruelty, recalling his hateful words just before her world went black. With a melancholic expression, she repeated the crown prince's claim that her existence from birth was a crime. Haunted by visions of mountains of corpses and seas of blood, she wondered if her protectors were still alive. Sis watched Saria from behind, sensing the heavy guilt and sorrow weighing on her heart. The girl looked away, insisting she was just a lowly serf who would only drag the dragon down. She let out a short gasp as something unexpected caught her attention, pulling her from her self-loathing thoughts. Sis reminded her that he was once a helpless, starving hatchling who survived only because of her kindness. The dragon looked down at her, ignoring her social status, caring only for the heart that had saved his life. Soft feathers fell around her as his promise to offer her comfort and reassurance whenever she felt lost. Tears glistened in Saria's vibrant blue eyes, reflecting her deep, emotional response to the dragon's unwavering loyalty. The girl reached out, seeking a bond based on friendship rather than a hierarchy of master and servant. A sudden, violent crash was heard as the scene shifted to a palace room with shattered glass. A teacup rolled across the floor, where Crown Prince Kyle Elian stood in a rage, his back to the audience. A panicked knight tried to calm the Crown Prince, but Kyle Elian demanded an immediate answer to his question. The Crown Prince threatened the soldiers' lives, making it clear that mocking his authority would result in immediate execution. The thought of a commoner girl succeeding in making a pact with the dragon twisted Kyle Elian's face with rage. Bathed in divine light, Saria stood amidst falling feathers, her resolve hardening despite her dire situation. A sharp halt was heard as the Crown Prince's boots struck the polished floor. Kyle Elian stopped his frantic pacing, his eyes narrowing and his lips tightening as he concluded there was only one solution. Against a swirling dark background, the blonde Crown Prince declared that both the dragon and Saria must be eliminated. The Count, visibly horrified, questioned the Crown Prince's terrifying order to commit murder. The Crown Prince argued that a serf controlling the guardian dragon undermined the legitimacy of the royal bloodline. Kyle Elian stressed the urgency of the situation, pointing out that the Elian Empire was currently embroiled in war. The Crown Prince pointed at the Count, ordering him to ensure that every witness to the pact was silenced forever. The Count's eyes widened in horror, realizing the Crown Prince was effectively demanding a regional massacre. An internal reflection revealed the Crown Prince's jealousy over the previous dragon, choosing his younger brother, the second prince. Standing before his volatile master, the Count decided that the dragon contractor could not be allowed to be slaughtered. Interion cautiously advised the Crown Prince that killing the girl in their current situation would be a strategic mistake. The Crown Prince let out a frustrated ugh as the Count explained the immense value of a guardian dragon in times of war. The Count pointed out that too many people had already seen the dragon, making a quiet cover-up impossible. He warned that if the Emperor discovered the truth, the Crown Prince's own claim to power would be threatened. The Count bowed his head slightly, pleading with Kyle Elian to reconsider his impulsive and dangerous decision. Deep in the dungeons, a meal of roasted food was delivered to the unlikely pair of prisoners. A glare from Siz's sharp blue eyes sent a chill of fear through the knight on duty. The soldier let out a terrified eek and turned to frantically rush out of the dragon's cage. Saria chuckled softly, amused by the sudden change in treatment now that she had Sis as her protector. The girl picked up a piece of food, realizing the royal family's true interest lay with the dragon. A flicker of worry crossed her face as she considered the deadly consequences if she and Sis were to be separated. The dragon called her name, sensing her rising anxiety, and pulled her back to the present. Sis rested his massive head against her, gently telling her to let go of her fear and trust him. Saria looked up, her blue eyes filled with wonder, a sense of safety growing in his presence. The girl smiled warmly, thanking her dragon friend, finding the strength to face whatever came next. A sudden announcement heralded the crown prince's arrival, his presence casting a shadow over the dungeon. Kyle Elian entered the area with a look of pure disgust, tooting at the filth while ignoring the flowers. Saria hardened her resolve, staring straight ahead, and declared that she no longer had a reason to be afraid. Crown Prince Kyle Elian scoffed at her arrogance, coldly claiming her life was forfeit for offending his royal majesty. A heavy thud echoed in Saria's chest as she fought against overwhelming fear. Her heart continued its frantic, rhythmic beat under the crown prince's gaze as she tried to remain calm. With a steady beat of her heart, the girl silently vowed that she would not let death take her. The crown prince, with royal arrogance, was enraged by Saria's lack of deference and demanded a proper greeting immediately. Amidst white flowers, Saria stood bathed in soft light, her spirit unbent by the crown prince's hostility. The blonde girl sighed wearily, closing her eyes against the weight of her current situation. Saria met his gaze with firm resolve, demanding the immediate release of her dragon friend from his bonds. She proposed that they both be allowed to live a quiet life in the dark forest, which incited the crown prince's fury. Enraged by her tone, the crown prince snapped at the girl for not acknowledging him. As the crown prince, Kyle Elian scoffed at her plan, reminding her that the guardian dragon is the property of the empire, not a commoner. The crown prince glared down with murderous intent, reflecting on his regret for not executing her for treason sooner. As the crown prince threatened a brutal execution, the brown-haired Count Interion desperately pleaded for his royal master to calm down. An internal chibi reflection revealed the Count's wavering loyalty to an empire that feeds humans to dragons. Realizing the crown prince's volatility, the chibi Count concluded that further conversation was now a dangerous mistake. Seeking comfort, Saria huddled in the dungeon cage, leaning against her dragon's warm, white scales. Interion asked if she intended to remain imprisoned forever. Saria confirmed that she would never leave his side as long as he was caged. The Count approached the bars with a respectful demeanor, asking for a private word with the girl. Recognizing him as the crown prince's companion, Saria listened as the man introduced himself as Interion. Holding up a lamp, Interion claimed he merely wanted to see if the prisoner needed any basic provisions. Saria remained silent, her suspicious and sharp gaze conveying her deep mistrust of the royal official's sudden show of kindness. The girl requested a weapon for self-defense, and the Count surprisingly agreed to procure a bow and dagger. Saria described her proficiency with a heavy bow, prompting Interion to offer her a powerful military longbow. As Saria asked why the Count was helping her without orders, the dragon let out a large yawn. She questioned the logic of his assistance, pointing out that a lowly serf like her rarely receives such high-level attention. Saria repeated the crown prince's cruel decree that her very existence as a royal look-alike was a capital offense. Interion looked at her with a gentle expression, asking if she found his willingness to risk helping her suspicious. He explained that he had two distinct reasons for helping her, and asked if she would prefer to hear the practical or the impractical explanation. A chibi Saria chose the practical reason first, earning a light-hearted chuckle from the bearded Count. The Count envisioned the white spires of Cestus, predicting that her destiny lay within the capital's royal palace. Saria let out a shocked ha as her eyes widened in utter disbelief at the man's unexpected prophecy. A chibi Saria objected, but Interion explained that the Empire would never allow a guardian dragon to live in peaceful isolation. He presented her with the stark reality. She would either become an imperial dragon knight or face a double execution. The Count was placing his bets on her success in the capital, arguing that it was her only path to survival. Saria looked away, her expression grim as she digested the impossible choice forced upon her and Sis. The girl turned back to the bars, asking to hear the impractical reason the Count had mentioned earlier. Interayon looked at the girl with a gaze full of silent empathy. His composure softened for a moment under the vast, starry sky. The Count reflected on the cruelty of sending a traumatized child back to the battlefield. Outside the stone fortress, Intyrion's voice drifted through the night, telling Saria to rest well and let go of her worries. Surrounded by flowers, Achibis noted that Saria's dragon blood was far purer than the Crown Prince's fading lineage. Torches flickered on the dungeon walls as rhythmic footsteps echoed down the hall, heralding an arrival. The heavy footsteps stopped before the cell, and an arrogant humph expressed royal disgust at the dungeon smell. Crown Prince Kyle, Elian, and Count Interayon stood before the cage, their presence bringing a new tension to the cell. The Crown Prince glared, dripping with arrogance, and continued to complain about the dungeon's inferior conditions. Saria retorted with a sharp tongue that if the conditions were so unbearable, the Crown Prince should simply stop visiting. The Crown Prince seethed at her insolence, while Interayon tried to mediate the growing hostility between them. The Count offered the girl a final reassurance, promising that the upcoming procedure would cause her no harm. Interayon prepared to read the royal decree from Emperor Elian, while the Crown Prince waited with his arms crossed. As the proclamation began, Saria found comfort in Sis' presence, trusting his power to protect her from any danger. Saria's gaze hardened as she secretly calculated a violent assault on the Crown Prince to ensure her own survival. Crown Prince Kyle and Count Interayon peered into the cell, finding the girl startled by their sudden proximity. As she recoiled from a murderous intent she had just held for the royal, a swirling darkness enveloped her thoughts. The blonde girl looked at her trembling hands, wondering how she could so easily resolve to take a life. Shadows of doubt and thorny visions plagued her as she questioned the darkness growing in her soul. The Crown Prince's reflection shattered in her vision, deepening her fear that her nature had been fundamentally broken. Kyle Elian revealed that a thorough investigation into her lineage had uncovered a shocking truth about her royal identity. The blonde girl stared in disbelief as the Crown Prince officially named her Alferia, the third princess of the Empire. Stunned by the sudden elevation in status, the girl struggled to reconcile her humble past with her new title. A comical image of Sis captured his shock as the Crown Prince demanded the girl's immediate return to the capital. Kyle Elian acknowledged her past suffering while insisting that she must now embrace her new role in the royal family. Stepping into the palace, the girl was struck by the grandeur and luxury that glittered with every step. She marveled at the opulence until a sudden halt signaled that she had reached the waiting Crown Prince. The blonde Crown Prince explained that her history would be rewritten, portraying her as a princess raised amidst hardship. Despite shaming her for her commoner origins, the Crown Prince sternly ordered her to maintain proper etiquette at court. Seeking assurance, the girl's identity guaranteed safety for her and her dragon companion. Countess Marianera offered a polite courtesy and her assistance in preparing the girl for her new life. The girl tentatively tried to refuse the fuss, but hesitated under the Crown Prince's cold, annoyed expression. With a playful and swift tug, Marianera whisked her away for a much-needed hot bath, despite her surprised protests. Steam rose as the girl soaked in the heat and the overwhelming weight of her sudden transformation. Relaxing in the bath, she reflected on the surreal shift from a soot-covered serf to the noble Princess Alferia. Her vibrant blue eyes reflected deep uncertainty as she contemplated the unknown future awaiting her in the imperial capital. Looking at the Crown Prince's back, she was haunted by the desperate thought that she had wanted to kill him. Dark visions of blood and shadows flooded her mind, sparking the fear that she was becoming someone entirely foreign to herself. Marianera checked in from behind screen, and the girl confirmed that she had finished her long, contemplative bath. Wrapped in a white robe, the girl listened as the noblewoman marveled at how beautifully she had cleaned up. The girl, feeling exceptionally awkward, received a gentle reminder that she must get used to this royal treatment. Facing a mirror, the girl watched as attendants began to style her long, blonde hair. As she tried on a dress, Saria noted that while her body was comfortable, her mind was not at ease. A determined glint shone in her eye as she prepared to navigate the dangerous political waters of her new reality. She found comfort in her sacred pact with Sis, knowing the dragon remained her most loyal and powerful protector. A chilling thought reminded her that any threat to her safety would trigger her dragon's lethal, protective rage. Glimpsing a mental image of shackles, she resolved to remain vigilant despite her new royal comforts. Marianera announced that the transformation was complete, marking the end of her first official dress session. The girl looked magnificent in a dark blue gown, gracefully accepting the noblewoman's apology for the humble preparations. The noblewoman relayed a request from Count Interion for her to join him for dinner, piquing the girl's wary curiosity. Walking the palace corridors, the blonde girl braced herself for the social and political challenges ahead. She saw the upcoming dinner as a vital opportunity to gather information and assess her host's true intentions. A formal announcement marked her entry into the dining hall, where she was received as Her Royal Highness. Count Interion and his wife greeted her warmly again, praising her stunning appearance in formal attire. Seated before a table laden with delicacies, the girl humbly deflected the compliments while keeping her senses sharp and focused on everything. The Count dismissed the servants, clearing the room for his private conversation with the new princess. Noting the man's sharp perception, she listened as he invited her to address him directly as Sir Interion. She spoke to Interion with a serious tone, stating her belief that he was the most trustworthy person at present. She questioned why the Emperor had made such a sudden decision about her status and return. Her resolve hardened into a silent vow of survival. Though deeply suspicious of the Empire's machinations, a flicker of understanding crossed her eyes as she processed the potential dangers hidden in her new life. At the lavish table, the girl questioned the Count if her current situation was merely an elaborate trap. Interion admitted that he was genuinely impressed by her sharp analytical skills and ability to remain vigilant. The blonde girl remained skeptical of this royal world that seemed so foreign to a former serf. A close-up on the blonde girl's face shows her determination not to let her journey end in a meaningless death. A white-gloved hand clenched as Sir Interion prepared to explain the most critical aspect of her new royal life. Facing a plate of dessert, the blonde girl recalled the harsh words she had heard during her recent imprisonment. Interion explained that due to the girl's resemblance to the royal family, the Empire sought to bind her and her great dragon to imperial authority. The girl, distracted by a chocolate cake, admitted that being entered into the peerage felt like a heavy and unwelcome burden. The girl blushed as she ate, and the Count gently teased her about her newfound love for sweets. Clearing her throat with a short, dry ahem, the girl asked what it meant to become the daughter of a Grand Duke. The text revealed the fabricated truth. She was to be officially named the illegitimate daughter of the late Grand Duke Rankin Salefia. Amid light-hearted banter, the girl asked for more details, while the Count admitted his knowledge was limited. Under the starry sky of the manor, the Count shared that the Grand Duke had died young, without leaving any heirs. The girl leaned back, pointing out with a mischievous smile that illegitimate daughter was just a euphemism for a child born out of wedlock. A bead of sweat formed on her forehead as she noted that fancy words couldn't change the reality of her social standing. Interion explained that due to her lack of royal blood, she could not inherit the vast territories of the Duchy of Lincoln. Leaning back in his chair, the Count revealed that she was registered as a princess and had been granted Hyacinth Castle. Realizing she was being placed in a position with no real power, the girl glanced at a passing servant. The Count clarified that her actual influence would depend entirely on her performance as the one chosen by the guardian dragon. Sir Interion sincerely promised to assist her, asking her to trust him and his family. The girl was skeptical, wondering why someone like the Count would take an interest in a serf who was once covered in soot. A rotating heraldic pattern reflected the Count's response, expressing his deep faith in her unique insight and sharp eye. The scene cut to her sharp blue eyes as the Count praised her resilient mind and survivalist realism. The girl closed her eyes, arguing that he was overestimating her as her title was merely an empty lie. The brown-haired man disagreed, reminding her that she was the undisputed master of the rare and powerful great dragon. As the Count explained the dire lack of active dragon riders, silhouettes of the Empire's 3 great dragons appeared. Interion insisted that given the wartime crisis, no one would dare question the legitimacy of the one chosen by the great dragon. Chibi-style figures of the two shared a moment of mutual encouragement, with the girl vowing to make wise decisions in the future. The blonde girl thought to herself that enduring this new royal life was her only way out for now. In quiet reflection, she closed one eye, preparing for the trials of the court. Brilliant particles swirled around the text, highlighting her history as a girl forced to fend for herself to survive. The girl collapsed at a desk piled high with difficult study materials and books, letting out a heavy sigh. Suddenly, a foot stomped heavily on the desk, startling the exhausted girl back to her difficult lessons. Lady Marianera smiled warmly, asking if the girl had managed to memorize the complex imperial family tree. The noblewoman insisted that everything must be learned before her departure, leaving the girl feeling extremely anxious and overwhelmed. An illustration depicted Marianera offering to teach the girl to read, write, and the complexities of politics and economics. To the girl's surprise, Marianera praised her for mastering the difficult subjects with astonishingly gifted speed. Moved by the praise, the girl thanked the noblewoman for her sincere faith and tireless teaching. Back at the blackboard, Marianera continued her lesson on noble titles, seemingly unwilling to rest for a moment. A quill pen rustled across paper, recording the long hierarchical list from Grand Duke down to the lowest-ranking knight. Marianera looked over the girl's shoulder, explaining how the order of power typically functioned within the Elian Empire. The girl stared at the list, reflecting on her past ignorance of the many titles that governed this world of nobles. An image of fluffy cakes and creamy desserts represented the many luxuries she was gradually growing accustomed to enjoying. A golden candelabra with beeswax candles symbolized the clean, bright life she now led in the Count's mansion. Through a window, the girl could be seen buried in books, still feeling out of place amid such royal splendor. Kyle Elian, clad in a red and black cloak, announced he would depart for the battlefield the next morning. The blonde crowned prince glanced back as the Count promised to prepare for the girl's own departure. Shortly after, Kyle offered a backhanded compliment, which the girl sharply refuted, causing the Count to try and placate them both. The girl stood in the hall, watching the crown princes departing back. With an expression of intensely guarded focus, she steeled her will, contemplating the political struggles ahead, knowing they would be unlike any hardship she had faced before. 2 days later, a brilliant blue sky greeted the girl as she prepared to depart for the imperial capital. The girl noticed other cyan great dragons, asking if they belonged to the knights tasked with escorting her journey. Interion smiled at the girl's look of wonder, promising that many more great dragons awaited her in the imperial capital. Princess Alferia moved with swift agility as she prepared for the next leg of her journey. The knights gave the girl a warm, celebratory hug as they acknowledged her new status as Your Highness. The blonde girl stroked the massive white dragon, affectionately teasing Sis for being a sensitive baby. Sis listened intently, as it had learned that few dragon species possessed the intelligence required for direct communication. The blonde girl mounted Sis, preparing to leave the manor, while Sir Interion watched with concern. The Count made a polite gesture, offering a final blessing for good fortune in her future. The girl looked back with a brilliant smile, expressing her heartfelt gratitude for everything the Interion family had done. Her hair fluttered in the wind as she turned toward the horizon, embracing the start of her flight. A formal announcement signaled the party's departure for the imperial capital, Cestal. Sis took to the sky with a powerful wish, soaring high above towering peaks and lush green valleys. The blonde girl gazed at the endless blue horizon, marveling at the world's breathtaking beauty. Sis complained about her past riding skills in a comical exchange, reminding her that she once nearly fell off its back. A knight flying alongside came to inquire, but the girl assured him that all was well. Despite the magnificent flight, a hint of fatigue showed on her face as the long journey continued. Her sharp blue eyes reflected a quiet determination to face the challenges awaiting her at the journey's end. Overlooking the vast landscape, she was struck by the immense scale of the imperial territories. She reflected on how Harper had once been her entire world, realizing just how small her former life was. A close-up on her eyes highlighted her deep contemplation of the unknown future unfolding before her. A lingering question surfaced in her mind. Was it truly possible to see the farthest ends of the entire continent? Sis playfully offered to fly her to the edge of the world, promising it would be a 2-week journey. The great dragon came to a sudden, sharp halt, leaving the girl to wonder what had caught its attention. She asked Sis in surprise what was happening, just as the great dragon prepared to demonstrate its superior flight speed. Sis proudly declared itself to be much faster than the cyan Perunian dragons used by ordinary imperial knights. As the lead knight called for a necessary rest, the party descended toward a tranquil river valley. The brown-haired knight scanned the camp, looking around in confusion for the princess's whereabouts. On a peaceful meadow, surrounded by white roses, the girl shared a quiet, intimate moment with her great dragon. The knights observed from a distance, struck by the divinely natural way she handled her powerful companion. The girl apologized for wandering off, explaining that she was busy feeding Sis unnecessary blood. During a conversation by the river, it was revealed that standard Perunian dragons only needed to be fed once a week. To her surprise, the knight explained that she would soon be inducted into the Empire's elite order of dragon riders. The girl admitted she thought all dragons required daily blood feedings, thus learning that her bond with Sis was special. The knights acted as messengers, announcing that lunch was ready, courtesy of the generous Interion family. Surprised by the informal arrangement, the girl found herself dining with a royal guard. With a gentle laugh, she encouraged the knights to relax, dispense with formalities, and enjoy the meal. As she sat on a rock eating a simple sandwich, the knights were deeply moved by her kindness. The girl insisted on being useful and offered to help clean up, which drew panicked protests from the guards. One knight confessed that he was initially anxious, but now found serving the princess much easier than expected. The brown-haired knight reflected on her lineage, acknowledging that she was indeed a member of the royal family. He was confident they would build a deep bond of friendship, while the blonde girl watched with a look of confusion and doubt. The knight smiled, finding her humble nature a refreshing change from the typical royal attitude. A knight pleaded with her to leave the chores to them, but the girl insisted on helping. Framed by flowers, the girl's radiant presence made the knights feel optimistic about their new assignment. With the Perunian dragons ready, the final order was given to pack up and resume the flight. After a grueling 5-hour journey through the clouds, the capital finally appeared on the distant horizon. Upon arrival, the party looked down upon the magnificent spires and walls of Hyacinth Castle. Staring at her massive new home, she questioned why such a grand estate had been bestowed upon her. The brown-haired knight criticized the injustice of her situation, while the girl contemplated the empty rhetoric of power. She admitted to Sis that she preferred the isolation of the castle to living with members of the royal family. Noticing a cluster of dilapidated buildings to the west, she asked about the city's slums. A knight sternly warned her to stay away from that area, calling the slums a dangerous hotbed of crime. The blonde girl looked to the sky, beginning her new life as an imperial princess in the perilous high society life of the capital. Sis' massive wings beat powerfully, scattering white feathers as it prepared to land. Formally introduced, Princess Alferia stood tall as the master of the legendary guardian dragon, Cisrelia. Upon arriving at Hyacinth Castle, a grand staff awaited to welcome the princess to her new home. Baron Axel Rosen and head maid Arden Kalia bowed deeply, introducing themselves to their new master. Alferia offered the staff a kind and polite smile, attempting to bridge the gap of her humble origins. A chill ran down the head maid's spine as she sensed an unexpected intensity from the girl. The princess requested the staff's patience as she adjusted to the complex life of the capital. A young, brown-haired maid excitedly spotted her new mistress at the top of the castle steps. Liz Collin introduced herself with a radiant smile, eager to begin her service to the new princess. Liz was struck by Alferia's impressive height, finding her mistress to be very radiant and approachable. The headmaid reminded the girl that her official coronation was scheduled for later that afternoon. A sense of urgency filled the air as the staff insisted the princess bathe and prepare for the ceremony immediately. Saria steeled herself for the transformation, calmly and resolutely accepting the directives for her royal duties. The text chronicled Saria's incredible journey from a former serf to officially becoming Princess Alferia of Elion. Sunlight glinted off the palace's white columns, marking the start of a major imperial event. A golden earpiece inlaid with a purple gem was an essential tool for an imperial knight. The description highlighted the flight communicator, which allowed dragon riders to collaborate seamlessly while soaring through the skies. Liz placed a shining white gauntlet on Alferia's hand, pleased to find the armor was a perfect fit. Now dressed in the full regalia of a dragon rider, Alferia asked who the previous owner of her second-hand armor was. Liz explained that the armor had belonged to the only woman to have ever tamed an Interion great dragon. The maid noted that Alferia had broken that solitary record, becoming the second woman in history to achieve such a status. The princess's eyes filled with contemplation as she considered the heavy legacy she now carried. While gliding over the capital, the great dragon inquired about her emotional state. Amidst the rolling city streets below, the white dragon asked in a gentle voice if she was nervous about the upcoming confrontation. As the princess admitted her anxiety while descending toward the imperial plaza, citizens looked up in awe. Above, a vision of a green-haired friend offered words of encouragement, promising to always be by her side. Alferia focused on the white scales beneath her, calming herself before the most important moment of her life. With a gentle expression, the princess thanked Sis for always being her source of strength and comfort. Alferia, dressed in striking red and white armor, arrived at the grand cathedral for her coronation. The girl recalled Count Antyrion's stern warning. She must never let her guard down within the treacherous capital. She remained on high alert, knowing that in this viper's nest, even a celebration could be a trap. A flashback revealed the Count had advised her that the imperial family remained dangerous despite her royal title. He instructed her to carefully count the rare great dragons present to assess the threat of an assassination attempt. Interion warned that if 3 Interion great dragons appeared, it was a clear signal of a plan to eliminate her. The Count reasoned that with the Empire at war, there was no logical reason for 3 of the great dragons to be present at once. Alferia was relieved to see only 2, indicating the trap had not yet been sprung. Sis identified the second dragon as Calgaden, earning praise for its keen observation. Alferia walked toward the high throne where the Emperor sat, feeling the pressure of intense scrutiny in the chamber. Emperor Adarian III watched from his throne as the new princess formally ascended the steps. She knelt and bowed her head solemnly as the fur-clad emperor, seated on his throne, observed the girl approaching him. The emperor studied her with a scrutinizing gaze, his expression unreadable beneath his neatly trimmed beard. Tension mounted as Alferia waited for the ruler to speak, her resolve tested in the silence of the great hall. The blonde emperor offered a formal welcome to the girl he claimed as family. He looked down at her, addressing her as his daughter and officially establishing her place in the royal bloodline. As the emperor expressed his joy, the girl gave a humble and rehearsed response of gratitude to her new father. The ruler turned to Lady Asterica to confirm whether the girl held a legitimate claim to the throne. Regarding the girl's succession, the high priestess closed her eyes and deemed the decision to be without fault, validating Alferia's status as an heir. The narration revealed that Asterica was the second princess and the high priestess of the Church of the Dragon God. An ornate crown was placed upon her head as a divine blessing descended upon the new princess of the Elion Empire. Crowned and resolute, Alferia began the sacred proclamation of her official ascension as an imperial princess. Standing beside the emperor, Alferia gazed out at the grand palace, her heart filled with the weight of her newfound royal burden. The holy decree named Alferia as the master of Hyacinth Castle and a member of the elite order of dragon riders. As her succession to the throne was announced, the silhouetted crowd erupted in a thunderous roar of approval. The emperor's scepter struck the ornate carpet, demanding Alferia's absolute focus and obedience to his words. The emperor turned with an icy gaze, warning her that the appearance of lineage did not equate to acceptance into the family. Empress Cecilia and the crown prince watched from behind, their expressions showing clear disdain for the new princess. The emperor bluntly reminded her that her royal status was a tool for the empire's military service. Sensing the hostility veiled beneath courtly etiquette, Alferia steeled herself for the political viper's nest she now inhabited. Princess Agnes scoffed at Alferia's background, mocking the simple name she had given the majestic guardian dragon. Grand Princess Fons observed the tense family dynamic from behind a white rose with a knowing, enigmatic smile. Feeling an intense gaze, Alferia turned in the hallway to find a young prince watching her with an uncertain expression. After she caught him watching her in silence, Third Prince Brute broke into a nervous sweat, clearly intimidated by her presence. Overcome with social anxiety, the blonde prince stammered an excuse and fled down the palace corridor. Asterica let out a hearty laugh, reassuring Alferia that Prince Brute meant no harm and behaved like a child. The High Priestess formally introduced herself, setting a warm and friendly tone for their first private interaction. Asterica cheerfully took Alferia's hand, inviting her for a visit to the temple soon. Asterica pointed out that their respective castles were close, with only a short carriage ride separating them. Alferia was surprised to learn that the High Priestess's duties strictly forbade her from leaving the temple. Asterica introduced their aloof half-brother, Hinterion, noting that he served as an official in the Ministry of Military Affairs. Watching the black-haired man walk away, Alferia declined a formal introduction, preferring to meet him naturally later. Under the cold moonlight, the castle stood silent as Alferia reflected on her first day as a member of the royal family. Anxious thoughts clouded Alferia's mind as she recalled the cold, judgmental gazes of her new royal siblings. She vividly remembered the moment she met in Tyrion's eyes, struck by the overwhelming weight he carried. A closer look at Tyrion's blue eyes revealed a cold depth that felt more mechanical than human. Despite his cold exterior, Alferia detected a hint of deep, unspoken loneliness in his sharp gaze. A haunting flashback revealed a younger, more innocent Hinterion before tragedy reshaped his world. A knight fell to his knees, delivering the stunning news that Tyrion's older brother had been killed in the line of duty. Overcome with guilt, the knight vowed to spend the rest of his life atoning for his failure to do his duty. In the silent aftermath, a young Hinterion listened to the various court rumors surrounding the suspicious death. The image of his tall, dependable older brother was seared into his mind as a symbol of lost security. A heartfelt memory of his brother's rare smile served as a bitter reminder of a kinder, simpler time. Standing at the funeral in a somber suit, the young boy felt the suffocating weight of false comfort. As he grew older, the initial grief evolved into a precise drive to uncover the truth behind the tragedy. Instead of choosing simple revenge, Hinterion developed a cold, detached clarity about the treachery of the royal family. Like the gears of a clock falling into place, his understanding of the world's cruelty solidified his resolve. Back in the present, Hinterion sensed Alferia's presence and turned to face the intruder. Amidst blooming flowers, Alferia paused, meeting the gaze of her mysterious half-brother. Alferia introduced herself and apologized for missing him earlier at the coronation. Hinterion formally identified himself, his voice devoid of warmth as he detailed his military position. He curtly informed her that the celebration was over and advised her to return to Hyacinth Castle immediately. Feeling somewhat embarrassed, Alferia explained that she had gotten lost while admiring the palace's beauty. Hinterion narrowed his eyes suspiciously, wondering if the new princess was secretly spying on the royal residence. He gave clear and efficient directions, telling her to find a guard to show her the way. Tyrion's cold demeanor softened slightly as he studied her face, searching for any sign of deception in her earnest expression. Alferia accepted his cold warning, glancing back as she began the long walk out of the palace. She offered a final, polite farewell, leaving the black-haired man standing alone in the corridor. Interion watched her leave, his expression still unreadable despite his formal acknowledgement of her rank. As Alferia disappeared down the hall, Interion found himself intrigued by her seemingly sincere and humble nature. Interion resolved to keep a close watch on Alferia, his expression turning cold and suspicious after their brief meeting. Sunlight streamed through ornate bedroom doors as a new day dawned at the lavish Hyacinth Castle. Waking to the sound of bird song, Alferia stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, still adjusting to her new life as royalty. The princess sat up shortly after her birth. An unbreakable curse had been placed upon her. Leaning against the ornate headboard, she prepared to face the heavy responsibilities of her first day as an official member of the royal family. Alferia reflected on her incredible journey from serf to princess, while recalling the breathtaking beauty of the palace. Looking through a stone archway, she was thankful she had run into Interion rather than a more dangerous family member. She shuddered at the thought of the harsh scolding she might have received had she met the intimidating crown prince instead. Alferia stood by the window, fixing her hair, steeling herself for the political challenges that awaited her today. As a clock suddenly chimed, Alferia entered the room, startling an old maid who was waiting to serve her. Alferia greeted the head maid and asked about the whereabouts of her personal attendant, Liz. Though the head maid promised a stern reprimand, Alferia quickly defended Liz, taking full responsibility for the delay. As Alferia prepared for her morning exercise, the head maid raised a question about the longbow in the princess's hands. To lift her spirits, Alferia requested use of the courtyard space, which the maid confirmed was entirely hers. With a bright, confident smile, the princess prepared to practice her archery and find herself again. A flicker of hesitation crossed Alferia's face as she contemplated the weight of her newly acquired imperial title. A rhythmic thudding echoed through the woods as a practice target was set up in a sunlit clearing. Alferia observed that even her makeshift training ground seemed exceptionally grand compared to the simple life she had left behind. Attentive maids hurried to assist the princess, who accepted their presence with a polite and slightly overwhelmed reaction. Alferia regulated her breathing, demonstrating the skills she had learned as a commoner with a practice stance. She had the sudden realization that the entire household would now move at her slightest gesture. She declared her new identity as Alferia and loosed an arrow, while Liz cheered for her stunning accuracy. As Liz offered to wipe her sweat, Alferia resolved to erase all lingering traces of her former life as a serf. The princess paused in thought, a hint of conflict in her eyes as she considered what she must cast aside. She clutched her ruby necklace, appearing resolute about the path she must take to survive at court. Breaking the silence, Alferia suddenly mentioned white bread, causing the head maid to stop in complete confusion. Despite the maid's bewilderment, Alferia maintained a firm, serious expression, her mind fixed on a specific memory. She formally requested that white bread be served at every meal, turning a childhood luxury into a daily necessity. A warm memory of a kind man sharing bread surfaced, representing the simple happiness of her former village life. A heavy bedroom door stood ajar, marking the transition as the princess prepared for her next official duty. A frantic voice called out to Alferia from behind, interrupting her quiet stroll down the palace corridor. Liz rushed forward, tearfully begging for forgiveness for the unforgivable mistake of oversleeping on such an important morning. Alferia gently comforted her friend, acknowledging that Liz was exhausted from attending to her late into the previous night. Liz continued to panic, insisting that it was her fundamental duty to serve the princess perfectly at all times. A question mark appeared over Liz's head as Alferia proposed a very specific and unusual form of atonement. Alferia humbly requested that Liz become her teacher and instruct her in basic reading and writing. Liz froze in place, her eyes wide as she processed the princess's unexpected and heartfelt request. Overcome with joy, Liz's eyes welled with tears as she enthusiastically agreed to help Alferia with her studies. Brilliant morning light streamed through a clear blue sky, heralding a hopeful new chapter for the young princess. The tall stone walls of the imperial palace loomed over the greenery, hiding the secrets of the dragon riders. Alferia arrived at the military training grounds, where a dragon's cry greeted her as she began her formal night training. Several nights, the uniformed knights warmly welcomed the princess's official induction into the Dragon Knights, with a formal notice confirming her arrival and stating she would serve as a high-ranking member of the elite unit. Surrounded by blooming flowers, Alferia offered a friendly greeting to her new comrades, a sense of belonging swelling in her heart. Sis let out a huge yawn, while the knights watched the majestic Anthesistrian dragon with clear awe. Upon learning he had to be separated from his master during her evening duties, Sis appeared both shocked and saddened. Alferia extended her pinky in a promise to take Sis flying later, soothing the dragon's anxiety with gentle words. With a clear purpose, the group guided Alferia to the commander of the Second Knight Order, as the first was currently away. Alferia followed a knight down a long corridor, its walls lined with grand portraits of the Empire's most legendary commanders throughout history. She marveled at the Empire's long history, noting how the various uniforms and weapons marked the changing eras. Alferia arrived at the Second Knight Order's headquarters, where a knight knocked and announced her arrival to the commander. The door opened with a crisp click, and a composed voice from within granted the princess entry. The white-haired elder, Count Tien Varun, introduced himself as the official commander of the Dragon Knights' Second Order. Varun apologized for the humble refreshments, but Alferia gracefully insisted the treats were more than enough. The commander sat across from her and explained that with the First Knight Order engaged in battle, she would not be needed for deployment just yet. Holding a delicate teacup, Alferia listened as the commander suggested she rest for a while before undertaking her duties. The princess decisively refused the offer of rest, expressing her strong desire to begin training immediately without wasting time. She set down the blue and gold teacup, stressing the need to be ready for battle at all times. Alferia insisted she could not rush onto the battlefield without first receiving proper knightly training within the order. A close-up on Varun's yellow eyes revealed his inner realization. This princess possessed the true spirit of a knight. Pleased by her determination, Varun agreed to arrange access to the training grounds after the princess requested a tour of the facilities. The commander presented an ornate purple dress sword, reminding her that the ceremonial weapon was not suited for actual combat. As they walked, Varun explained a surprising rule. All knights had to provide their own weapons and uniforms personally. Gazing up at the high towers of the Grand Palace, Alferia privately wondered where the royal budget was allocated if equipment wasn't provided. Varun led the way through a stone archway, informing the princess they had arrived at their first destination. A brilliant smile spread across the princess's face as Varun pointed out the massive training hall and the nearby structure that housed the dragons. Passing by the target range, Varun suggested a longsword would be better suited for Alferia's tall, athletic build. Varun's promise to take her to the Imperial Forge next drew a cheerful thank you from the eager new princess. They entered the enormous dragon den, where Alferia appeared dwarfed before the massive heads of the majestic creatures residing within. Varun explained that raising dragons was immensely expensive, meaning only royalty could afford to keep them at home. Stroking a dragon's nose, Varun suggested they ride dragons to reach the distant flight training grounds more quickly. A diagram illustrated the difference between feathered and scaled dragons, noting that scaly skin was better suited for intense combat. A sudden, deafening roar startled the commander, while Alferia laughed, recognizing the unique charm of a certain familiar dragon. Cisrelia looked down over the woods, its blue eyes allowing Varun to perceive the dragon's clear, jealous streak. Despite Varun's comment on how fond the beast was of her, Alferia petted a white feathered dragon. As the princess continued to interact affectionately with the giant white dragon against a backdrop of pale yellow flowers, the commander muttered a confused "pardon me." Alferia began to explain the true nature of her relationship with Cisrelia. With a sincere, radiant smile, Alferia proudly declared that she and her dragon, Cisrelia, were actually best friends. Varun crossed his arms with a contemplative look, admitting he had heard rumors about her peculiar bond with the dragon. The commander politely apologized for his earlier cold remarks about dragon ownership, and Alferia cheerfully accepted his sincere apology. The princess soared through the clouds on the back of the white feathered dragon, approaching the vast flight training grounds. Alferia gazed down in awe at the immense mountains and lands dedicated to dragon training and combat drills. Spotting a knight on a swift white dragon nearby, she asked about the different species used by the order. Varun pointed out the rocky mountains used for dragon's breath practice, while Alferia inquired about the grounds visible below. Looking down at the targets, Varun mentioned crossbow and javelin practice, which prompted Alferia to ask about the use of longbows. Varun explained that longbows were considered a commoner's weapon, leading a shocked Alferia to wonder if she was forbidden from using them. As the camera zoomed in, Alferia dove toward the targets, sending Varun into a frantic panic as she began her demonstration. High in the air, the princess drew her bow, determined to recall her archery skills from her past life. She focused intently, convinced her experience shooting targets from castle walls would translate perfectly to shooting from Caesarelia's back. With a sharp whoosh, the arrow shot toward the target, cutting through the air with incredible speed and power. Alferia let out a baffled of surprise and confusion as she watched the result of her first shot. A bead of sweat on her face, the princess stared, realizing something had gone wrong with her mid-air attempt. A narration confirmed her shocked discovery. Despite her prior confidence and skill, she had completely missed the target. The arrow landed limply in the dirt, eventually rolling to a stop far from the practice range's intended target. With Varun's dragon flying beside her, she questioned why she had missed despite her previous experience shooting from high places. A helpful diagram explained how battle theory and a dragon's actual flight path caused her arrow to go off course. Varun took the lead on his own dragon, offering to demonstrate how a dragon knight truly fights in high-speed aerial combat. The commander's dragon tilted its head back as flames began to flicker at its mouth, preparing to launch a powerful attack. With a tremendous roar, the dragon unleashed a massive fireball, showcasing the terrifying and destructive power of its breath. Alferia watched from a distance, clearly stunned and impressed by the incredible power displayed by the veteran commander's dragon. Alferia asked if Sis could also use a breath attack. The dragon indignantly confirmed his status as a great Anthus-Sistrian dragon. With a sudden whoosh, Sis shot into the air, startling Alferia with the dragon's abrupt and powerful takeoff. Alferia steadied herself against the wind, her gaze determined as she soared through the sky in training. Sis told her to hold on tight before unleashing a powerful breath of blue flame that lit up the sky. As a massive explosion echoed across the range, the dragon's attack completely obliterated a distant mountain peak. Alferia let out a pained groan, shielding her eyes from the blinding light and debris of the huge blast. Still in shock, the princess stared wide-eyed, realizing the devastating power her dragon companion possessed. A thought bubble highlighted her awe at the incredible power unleashed in an instant by her guardian dragon. As the smoke cleared with a faint whistling sound, a massive, jagged crater was revealed where the mountain peak had once stood. Stunned by the sight of the destruction, Alferia once again marveled at the incredible attack power of the Empire's dragons. Sis panted heavily, explaining that he could only use such a high-intensity attack 3 times a day. Liz rushed forward with a towel, eager to serve her princess perfectly to make up for her earlier morning blunder. Insisting she was just doing her duty, Liz offered the towel as Alferia caught her breath. Count Varun led the way over the rugged terrain, agreeing to guide the princess to the Order's specialized weapons facility. Upon arriving, Alferia was impressed by the scale of the facility, noting the Imperial Forge was much larger than she had anticipated. Varun mentioned the forge's prestige in the capital and promised Alferia's custom longsword would be ready soon. Alferia politely hoped she wasn't taking up too much of the commander's time, but he insisted it was an honor. Varun revealed that the Dragon Knights had high hopes for her, which drew a surprised and curious reaction from the princess. Looking at the rows of practice fields, she asked if there were any other female knights currently serving in the order. Varun explained that most night orders led by women were merely ceremonial high society clubs, lacking any real military or combat duties. Alferia expressed her disappointment, but Varun mentioned that a very small number of women had actually achieved high knightly status. A notice highlighted a dame of the First Night Order, a woman who had earned significant recognition as a warrior. A close-up of sharp purple eyes hinted at the cold and powerful presence of the legendary dame Elmira. Alferia recognized the name as belonging to the Empress's family, realizing Elmira was likely the Empress's half-sister. Varun groaned at the mention of another female knight, Dame Beatrice, who served in the Fourth Night Order and the Royal Guard Cavalry. As a blacksmith approached, a voice apologized for the wait, signaling that the princess's new weapon was finally ready. A gleaming steel sword was presented on a decorative background, specially chosen to suit the princess's tall, athletic build. She found the blade to be quite good and cheerfully thanked the hard-working blacksmith. Alferia requested the bill be sent to her castle, secretly worrying about the immense expense of the new equipment. Back at the palace, Lady Aiden appeared overwhelmed when Alferia requested a complete record of all the castle's monthly expenses. Alferia reiterated her new status, firmly reminding the head maid that she was now the undisputed master of the castle. A chart illustrated the monthly budget, showing that a member of the royal family received 500 Draco for living expenses. Lady Aiden explained the distribution of salaries for servants and staff, detailing the current use of the castle's funds. The princess questioned the food budget for the dragon, pointing out that the livestock Sizzy ate daily shouldn't cost so much. Sweating under the princess's scrutiny, Lady Aiden nervously promised to investigate possible errors in the financial accounts. Alferia simply told her to investigate and dismissed her, hiding her growing suspicion behind a calm, cool expression. Watching the maids hastily retreating back, Alferia suspected several expenses had been inflated in an attempt to embezzle funds from her. Looking at the palace under the moonlight, the princess resolved to master accounting in order to manage her own finances. A close-up of a wooden practice sword marked the beginning of another day of harsh physical training for Alferia. Surrounded by blue flowers, Alferia finished her training as the instructor declared an end to the day's arduous swordsmanship practice. Alferia let out a weary breath and wiped her brow, thanking the knight for another excellent and productive session. Liz rushed forward with a towel, eager to serve her princess perfectly to make up for her earlier morning blunder. Insisting she was just doing her duty, Liz offered the towel as Alferia caught her breath. A colorful chart displayed Alferia's packed schedule, illustrating how she balanced her nightly duties with intensive academic studies. Lady Aiden interrupted the peaceful moment, announcing that an urgent letter had arrived from the second princess, Astelica. A dark, mysterious envelope with a black wax seal and pink floral accents was presented, containing a formal yet tense invitation. Alferia asked the maid how she had identified the sender, as she noticed no name was written on the outside. The maid pointed to a candelabra crest, explaining that such emblems were the primary way of identifying royal families. Lady Aiden explained that the dragon crest specifically referred to those who had formed a pact with a dragon, signifying Asterica's noble status. Alferia noted the maid's condescending tone, wondering if she could ever truly earn the respect of the palace elite. Alferia asked the brown-haired Liz, who jumped in surprise when Alferia requested she verify and read the temple's invitation. A formal scroll invited the princess to the Grand Temple for tea and a light blessing or something of the sort. Alferia broke into a nervous sweat, baffled by the High Priestess's unexpectedly casual and blunt writing style. Walking through the palace, Alferia found the vocabulary odd, with Liz and Lady Aiden following closely behind. Liz tilted her head in confusion, asking the princess what she meant about the priestess's unusual wording. A portrait explained the strict imperial law forbidding women from marrying outside the high-ranking Amortat family bloodline. The narration continued, showing a portrait of Princess Ferns, who had been bound by these traditional bloodline preservation rules. After Alferia called the marital restrictions completely absurd, Lady Aiden sternly warned the princess to watch her words. Alferia sighed, possibly fated to a life of solitude under these restrictive royal customs. As they continued down the bright, grand corridor, Lady Aiden admitted that family dynamics were complicated. Liz peeked into the room, reminding Alferia that they had to choose a suitable outfit for the upcoming temple visit. A large purple notice highlighted the shock of Alferia's nearly empty wardrobe, which contained only 2 simple dresses. Liz was clearly pained by the Emperor's neglect, while Alferia calmly explained their very tight monthly living budget. 2 floating bubbles highlighted her upcoming birthday, social debut, and a mandatory temple visit. Alferia smiled gently, trying to soothe Liz's growing frustration and tears with her calm, resilient demeanor. Liz lowered her head with a hesitant blush, struggling to find the words to express her concern for the princess's lifestyle. A gloomy scene revealed other maids looking down on Alferia's commoner status and plotting to exploit her for her jewelry. Yet she stood tall and confident, unaffected by the petty gossip of others. Liz watched her princess with deep admiration, as Alferia prioritized living a peaceful and secure life with Cisrelia. Alferia radiated sincere kindness, telling Liz not to worry about their hardships and to focus on their shared happiness. A joyful blush spread across Liz's face as she eagerly accepted the princess's comfort and positive outlook on life. The 2 friends stood in the sunlight, united by a bond far stronger than that of a mere servant and royal. A majestic white carriage stood waiting outside the palace entrance under a brilliant sky, ready to begin their sacred journey. Now dressed in a stunning red and white ensemble, Alferia prepared to depart for the temple with a gift in hand. A crisp footstep sounded as the princess boarded the carriage, marking the start of her visit to the priestess. The carriage wheels clattered rhythmically on the paved street leading to the temple. Seated inside the luxurious carriage, Alferia and Liz enjoyed a rare moment of travel together. As they departed, Alferia marveled at the luxury, while Liz confessed she had always longed for a quiet country life. Resting her face in her hand, Alferia enthusiastically invited Liz to start a garden with her next year. Liz gazed excitedly out the window, imagining their future cottage and the fun of playing house together. They arrived at the Grand Temple of the Dragon, a stunning white architectural marvel under the clear sky. Liz followed behind Alferia, carrying a large ceremonial box, as they began the final, mandatory walk into the Holy Temple. A close-up captured Alferia's captivating blue eyes as she took in the breathtaking grandeur of the sacred grounds. A large bubble explained that many visitors were praying today, hoping to receive blessings from the princess's ceremony. A long-haired acolyte led the way, explaining that Mother Asterica was eagerly awaiting the princess's arrival inside. Passing through a towering white archway, Alferia mentally marveled at the astounding scale of the temple's architecture. A high-angle view showed Alferia following the acolyte down a path decorated with intricate draconic symbols and carvings. A black-haired woman in a floral dress prayed silently, having come specifically to witness the princess's special blessing ceremony. The acolyte pointed to a grand entrance, announcing that the inner sanctum lay just beyond the curtains. The acolyte explained that only blue-eyed, blonde-haired members of the royal family were permitted to enter this specific area of worship. A mysterious figure stood in the depths. A slender hand rested on a white and gold chest, signaling deep piety or a greeting. Mother Asterica appeared, a beautiful woman with shimmering purple eyes and a noble, shining gold headdress. With a soft footstep, Alferia knelt, showing deep reverence before the temple's powerful high priestess. A glowing bubble began a prayer for Alferia's future to be granted infinite happiness and divine protection. In a serene and elegant scene, the priestess stood beside the kneeling princess, while Alferia remained in prayer with her eyes closed. Alferia offered her sincere thanks to Mother Asterica for the powerful and solemn blessing. A quick blink signaled the end of the ceremony, leaving the princess in a peaceful state of quiet reflection. Asterica smiled warmly, asking if the princess was tired before inviting her to her chambers for a private talk. A rhythmic thudding sound echoed. Alferia followed Asterica and her acolyte deeper into the temple's inner sanctum. During their private conversation, Alferia was speechless and bewildered, her eyes wide as she processed the High Priestess's shockingly casual demeanor. Asterica leaned back on a sofa, urging Alferia to dispense with formalities, while Liz and the princess were completely stunned. Asterica admired a beautiful blue and black feathered fan, identifying it as being made from the dragon Cisrelia's own feathers. With a playful wink and a laugh, the High Priestess insisted the young princess call her Asterica directly. Alferia admitted her surprise, finding it difficult to reconcile Asterica's casual attitude with her distinguished position as High Priestess. Nervous sweat appeared on Alferia's face when the light-haired priestess casually suggested having a beer while they talked. Asterica explained that she never chose this life and used her mandatory single status to disregard the temple's strict rules. A narration revealed the cruel imperial law. Only one princess could marry, while the others were forced into a lifetime of solitude. Asterica shocked Alferia by claiming the dragon god didn't exist, dismissively waving away any fear of divine punishment. Asterica rested her chin on her hand, watching the princess with a knowing, mischievous glint in her purple eyes. Alferia maintained a serious expression, thinking that speaking so openly about doctrinal violations was a dangerous and sensitive topic. Asterica reassured the confused princess, explaining that her high value to the empire ensured she was safe from any imminent threats. Looking at her wooden mug, Asterica mentioned a secret method the royal family used to preserve its dragon bloodline. A decorative golden frame posed a question about the Immortat family and its connection to the princess with the strongest dragon blood. Dark silhouettes depicted various high-ranking family members involved in the empire's complex social and political web. A detailed family tree explained how the royal family shifted from inbreeding to creating the Immortat family for healthier offspring. Despite the change in their breeding practices, the text noted that certain side effects still persisted through the generations. Alferia held her drink, looking deeply disturbed as she reflected on the cold, dark history of her royal ancestors. A portrait depicted a nervous-looking man named Brute as a visual example of the lingering physical complications in the bloodline. Asterica explained that despite these bloodline issues, a new individual with abnormally strong dragon blood had suddenly appeared. Alferia's eyes widened in surprise when Asterica revealed this powerful newcomer had no blood relation to the royal family. A close-up focused on the High Priestess's intensely focused gaze as she spoke of this mysterious newcomer. A chibi version of Alferia looked both annoyed and suspicious as Asterica discussed the tricky complexities of a potential marriage with the princess. A blond man appeared as Asterica explained the political impossibility of a union with the currently married crown prince. A marriage to Ewan was discussed, with the move seen as essentially declaring him the next emperor, which would invite immense opposition. Alferia tightened her grip on her mug, lamenting the cold reality that even an imperial princess was seen as mere property for political gain. The conversation turned to a man named Enerion. Alferia blinked in confusion, letting out a surprise "huh?" as she tried to keep up with the priestess's revelations. Alferia paused with her hands on her lap, struggling to find the right words for the situation. Asterica described the man's inhuman coldness, noting his icy personality made him difficult for anyone to approach. As Asterica set down her mug with a crisp clink, she declined to reveal more about the man's personal hardships and longing for affection, suggesting they might end up becoming close friends. Alferia responded softly. Asterica stretched her arms behind her head, leaning back on the sofa with a contemplative and calm expression. The High Priestess gazed into the distance, her noble profile outlined by the soft light of the private temple chambers. From a high-angle view, Alferia requested to hear about Asterica's past life as a serf, and the priestess agreed. A soft floral pattern filled the screen, marking a smooth transition to the story of Asterica's humble origins. The scene shifted to the exterior of the Grand Temple at sunset, its white towers gleaming against a vibrant orange and yellow sky. Alferia thanked Asterica for her honesty, moved by the priestess's willingness to share her deeply personal and painful history. Alferia took the priestess's hand, mentioning Asterica's family and her concern for their well-being. Alferia offered her help, promising to use her position to find out how Asterica's parents and younger brother were doing. A close-up of Alferia's eyes captured her startled reaction as she began to speak about the priestess's request. With a quick bounce, Alferia shot to her feet in shock, while Asterica reminded her that she held immense influence as the high priestess. Asterica explained that the temples scattered everywhere served as information hubs, allowing her to gather data from across the empire. Before agreeing to the search, Asterica pointed at Alferia, demanding a solemn promise in return. Asterica made the princess promise that no matter what news they found, she would never visit her family in person. Asterica looked down at Alferia, explaining that a visit from an imperial princess would bring dangerous attention to a serf's home. Asterica reminded the expressionless Alferia of her distinguished status, a princess, the daughter of a grand duke, and a powerful dragon contractor. With a heavy groan, a chibi version of Alferia reluctantly agreed to the promise, while a smiling Asterica looked pleased. Asterica noted her brother's coldness, while Alferia expressed gratitude for the high priestess's warmth. Alferia blushed, nervously contemplating the weight of her new royal responsibilities. Asterica requested to see Alferia's archery skills during her upcoming visit to Hyacinth Castle. As the high priestess prepared to leave, Liz playfully defended their informal behavior. Night fell over the temple, with white lilies blooming under a starry, deep blue sky. The two parted ways affectionately outside the holy temple under the starry sky. Dressed in an elegant blue floral outfit, Asterica warmly invited Alferia to seek her out for companionship. Alferia asked if she could return the favor by hosting the high priestess at her own home. With a gentle smile, Alferia invited Asterica to be the very first official guest at Hyacinth Castle. Rhythmic clatters and heavy thuds echoed as the imperial carriage carried the princess home. Bathed in a magical glow, Alferia boarded the carriage, and the evening journey officially began. Gentle snowflakes began to fall as Alferia gazed into the winter night with a solemn expression. Watching the snow descend upon the palace, Alferia realized that winter had finally arrived in the empire. With a sharp haya, a wooden practice sword cut through the air with incredible speed. Alferia panted from the exertion, fully focused on her sword forms during the harsh morning practice. The new instructor, Viscount Kotzel-Nimmer, praised the princess's rapidly improving martial skills. Alferia took a moment to recover her strength while the seasoned instructor, Kotzel, prepared for the next stage of training. The instructor announced that today's lesson would shift from hand-to-hand combat to controlling magical power. Kotzel directed Alferia's attention to a thick metal pillar to demonstrate the power of mana infusion. Kotzel drew his sword, explaining that physical strength alone could not pierce such dense, enchanted metal. With a powerful roar and a clean slash, a mana-infused strike split the metal pillar in two. Alferia watched in awe as Kotzel explained how infusing a weapon with mana could produce devastating effects. Kotzel noted that Alferia's powerful draconic lineage would allow her to manifest magic instantly in battle. They discussed how mages use complex devices to compensate for the lack of naturally high-purity dragon blood. A narrative visual showed how imperial mages must store mana in their hearts, a slower and less efficient method. Kotzel warned that if Alferia tried to cast spells like a mage, her heart would be destroyed. She resolved to master her gift and learn to wield her innate magical power. Kotzel explained that mana control is the art of releasing the energy stored within one's own body. The princess raised her wooden sword, trying to focus her will and infuse the weapon with mana. A heavy, silent atmosphere filled the courtyard as Alferia's first attempt produced no magical reaction at all. Kotzel reassured her that the practice was difficult and required a unique, intuitive moment of spiritual enlightenment. The instructor held up a small piece of material, emphasizing that everyone's path to finding their power is different. A silhouette visual showed different warriors finding enlightenment through spiritual discipline or the harsh realities of battle. Alferia stood in the quietly falling snow of the training grounds, reflecting on her teacher's words. The blonde princess refused to be complacent, vowing to give her all to her training. A shout from across the garden startled the princess from her contemplation. Liz rushed in to announce that royal guests had arrived, abruptly ending the day's training. The arrival of her sister Asterica and Lord Interion was formally announced as they entered the palace. A formal portrait showed Asterica and the tall, dark-haired Interion arriving in their finest imperial attire. Asterica cheerfully rushed toward Alferia, eager to begin their visit at the magnificent Hyacinth Castle. A sudden hug caught Alferia off guard as her enthusiastic sister held her in a sincere and warm embrace. Alferia greeted the stern Interion, who offered the young princess a polite but restrained welcome. A chibi-style Asterica remained attached to her younger sister, while Interion maintained his usual aloof expression. Narrative text highlighted Alferia's growing discomfort as she tried to navigate the complex family dynamics. As the three royals sat down for tea, a tense silence was accompanied by the rhythmic sound of a thumping heartbeat. Despite Asterica's cheerful attempts to get the family members to bond quickly, an awkward tension lingered. Interion dryly commented that his war stories would likely only interest the eccentric high priestess. Alferia's face paled as she wondered how someone as boorish as Asterica could hold such a sacred title. Asterica, happily munching on bread, explained that understanding military affairs was crucial for all members of the empire. Interion discussed the upcoming war, weighing Ewan's competence against their brother Kyle's inexperience. Asterica questioned the crown prince's reasons for returning during wartime, while Alferia listened, distracted by the mention of delicious pastries. Interion set down his teacup with a snap, agreeing with Alferia's assessment of the current military situation. Interion explained how the enemy emperor had retreated to the capital, leaving regional armies to manage the front lines. The discussion continued, with Interion noting that the opposing ruler had only recently ascended to the throne. Staring into his tea, Interion described the internal instability of the Heron Empire following a devastating and prolonged civil war. Alferia admitted she hadn't considered these strategic details, viewing the complex conversation as a valuable learning experience. A lighter mood returned as Asterica hummed a cheerful tune and leaned toward the focused and serious blonde princess. Interion shifted the topic to the upcoming winter hunt, suggesting an end to the heavy discussion of war. A comical visual showed a white dragon throwing a tantrum out of boredom with the military talk, while Alferia shyly stared into her teacup. Alferia looked forward to participating in the hunt, but Asterica warned that their father would not allow it. Asterica explained that a public appearance would force Alferia into a formal role, which her father currently opposed. A cheerful flashback showed Alferia's knight comrades surprising her with a cake for her 16th birthday during training. Gazing at the snowy mountains, Asterica described how the hunting season's banquets served as important social events for the regional nobility. Asterica explained that the hunt was a prelude to the New Year's ball, offering an opportunity for a social debut. Resting her head in her hand, Asterica noted Alferia's lack of interest in high society despite her royal status. Framed by blue flowers, Asterica reminded Alferia that as a host, she would always be the center of attention. Interion stood up, suggesting the ball was the perfect stage for the princess to formally present herself to the social world. A close-up focused on Alferia's determined blue eyes as she carefully weighed the heavy advice from her royal guests. Asterica showed playful suspicion at Interion's sudden helpfulness, finding his active interest in Alferia's social life highly unusual. Interion mentioned that helping Alferia was Cisrelia's wish, maintaining his usual calm and inscrutable composure as he served tea. Asterica reflected on her own past as a hunter, emphasizing the deep responsibility she felt in her previous life. Alferia blinked in confusion, struggling to grasp the deeper meaning behind Asterica's cryptic and philosophical words about identity. Preparing to leave, Asterica declined Alferia's dinner invitation, leaving the remaining matters to the stern Interion. A soft whisper was heard as Asterica leaned in, sharing one last secret message with the surprised blonde princess. Asterica handed over a sealed report, revealing she had found Alferia's family and warning her to read it in private. Asterica waved a cheerful and energetic goodbye, while Entarion followed behind with his usual silent and distant demeanor. Alferia clutched the secret letter to her chest, watching her guests depart as her maid waited in the background. Outside, Asterica mentioned riding in the snow, finding Tyrion's decision to help Alferia attend the hunt completely unexpected and strange. Asterica noted that it was a significant change for the cold Entarion to take such an active role in his sister's life. Entarion remained silent as he looked at the high priestess, who warned that his interference could disrupt their father's meticulous plans. Entarion acknowledged that this led Princess Asterica to question why he was suddenly so curious about her. Entarion revealed he wanted to see if a girl of humble, uneducated origins could truly adapt to the rigors of high society. The dark-haired man believed that if Alferia succeeded, it would bolster his confidence in his own difficult political work. Asterica frowned in disappointment, calling Entarion the worst for viewing their sister as a mere social experiment. As the carriage moved through the quiet, snow-covered city streets, Entarion crossed his arms and let out a soft sigh. A close-up of Tyrion's icy blue gaze captured his inner reflection on his own ambitions and the path ahead. A haunting flashback depicted a tall, cloaked figure leading a small boy through a lonely and cold cityscape. Entarion recalled a moment of struggle, watching a coin fall as he vowed never to settle for a mediocre life and to achieve greatness. Entarion asserted that as long as he lived, he would keep moving forward. Across the carriage, Asterica watched her brother, questioning how he intended to reach such heights with that detached attitude. Entarion noted the dangers of excessive ambition, but his cold expression suggested he was fully prepared for any outcome. As Asterica considered suggesting Alferia as empress and Ewan's wife, a phantom image of a crowned Alferia appeared. Entarion dismissed the idea, pointing out that Ewan lacked the justification to be considered a candidate for emperor. Asterica firmly reminded the dark-haired man that Alferia was a person, not a political pawn. A shadowy silhouette served as a warning, implying that viewing others merely as tools would ultimately lead to deep and inescapable regret. Alferia stood alone in the library with the letter, while Tyrion's thoughts declared himself just another tool for achieving his goals. A heavy atmosphere filled the room, with a warning describing the inevitable moment when Alferia's emotions would become uncontrollable. Alferia began to read the investigative report, which detailed the current status and location of the Sirius family from Harper. The report grimly revealed that the head of the family had been killed in battle, though his wife had miraculously survived. Turning a page, Alferia learned that the eldest daughter, Saria, had shown incredible courage, killing 2 enemy knights in the fighting. While reading the report, Alferia learned that a woman had disappeared into the river during the castle's demolition. The report concluded with the discovery of a surviving son, the tragic details leaving Alferia visibly shaken. Overwhelmed by the newfound variables, Alferia collapsed on the library floor, her mind filled with worry. The cold report revealed that the surviving son now cared for his injured mother, who was left with a permanent limp. Looking out at the castle, Alferia realized Entarion had successfully convinced their father to let her join the winter hunt. On her way to Enthuasith Castle, Alferia made a detour to the Marquisate of Krezel to greet the local nobility. A heavy, sudden thud sounded as the white dragon's powerful claws touched down, marking the princess's grand arrival. Draped in a magnificent red cloak, Alferia dismounted from her dragon and was greeted with deep reverence by the local lord. Lord Eniuswith welcomed the princess again after 4 months, while Alferia gracefully hoped her visit had not caused too much trouble. Lord Eniuswith invited her inside for a banquet, and Alferia kindly requested that her dragon, Sis, be fed. Seated comfortably indoors, Alferia smiled and explained that Cisrelia's speed had made her long journey pleasant and swift. At the formal dinner, Alferia expressed her sincere gratitude for Lord Eniuswith's hospitality and continued concern. A crisp sound rang out as Alferia cut into her steak, the noise marking her shift to more serious matters. The princess focused her attention, steering the conversation toward the deeper alliance she sought with the lord's noble family. Alferia asked if Lord Eniuswith was still willing to help her family, as they had previously discussed in private. Maintaining her composure, the princess revealed there was a specific, critical task that required the Lord's immediate attention. With grim focus, Alferia confessed her suspicion that her own steward and maid were stealing from her treasury. Alferia recalled Entyrion's visit to Hyacinth Castle a few days prior, when he had requested to speak with her privately. In a flashback, a humming Asterica was relaxed while Entyrien prepared to reveal a dark truth about the castle staff. Entyrien revealed that the steward, Baron Axel Rosen, had been embezzling estate funds to maintain a lavish, secret life. Returning to the present, a flash of anger crossed Alferia's face as she processed the betrayal of her trusted household staff. While cutting her food, Alferia explained her investigation into the ledgers and her desperate need for a truly trustworthy administrator. Lord Entiuswith listened intently, acknowledging the gravity of the situation and the need to secure the princess's royal finances. The Lord warned that helping her in the capital would be expensive, especially since her 16th birthday had gone largely uncelebrated. Alferia acknowledged her previous complacency, but asserted that she could no longer ignore the well-being of her loyal subjects. The princess rose with a new sense of purpose, vowing to take action, while her brown-haired maid watched with a look of concern. With a soft rustle, Alferia led Lord Entiuswith through the hall, her movements now filled with royal authority. Alferia picked up a bow, instructing the surprised lord to simply watch as she demonstrated her newfound resolve. A rhythmic stretching sound was heard as Alferia drew the bow, noting that the post-hunt ball would be her stage. With a crisp thwack, Alferia loosed an arrow, declaring her intention to become the center of all attention. With a sharp crack, the arrow struck true, perfectly shattering the target in a display of her deadly and calculated precision. Lord Eniuswith was stunned by her skill, while Alferia offered a relaxed smile, her intentions now made clear. Deeply impressed, the Lord begged forgiveness for his earlier doubts and pledged to heed the princess's future advice. Watching her, Lord Entiuswith considered her far superior to the crown prince for her compassion and immense emotional control. The Lord suggested his eldest daughter, Lean Tapaza, as the perfect candidate to manage the castle's complex finances. Walking away, Alferia firmly declared that she must discipline the treacherous steward to assert her authority. With a heavy clench, Alferia tightened her fist, determined to set things right in her long-neglected Hyacinth Castle. Surrounded by ghostly chains, Alferia's inner monologue warned that she was ready to personally punish those who had betrayed her. Lying amidst flowers, Alferia reflected on the fragile nature of her life and the constant threats she had to face. Thanking Lord Eniuswith for his sanctuary, Alferia prepared for her departure, promising to maintain more secure communications in the future. Sis took to the air, carrying the princess over a lush green forest as the sun began to set. Looking into the dragon's intelligent eyes, Alferia communicated with Cisrelia as they continued their journey through the clouds. Soaring high above, Alferia decided to make a detour to Harper to investigate the surviving members of her lost family. Alferia acknowledged her past secrecy, but admitted to a painful, deep-seated desire to see her loved ones from above. Sis observed the princess, noting how she had avoided the guards to undertake this personal mission. On the ground, a pair of villagers witnessed the majestic white dragon flying past the setting sun and gasped in wonder. The people watched in awe as white feathers fell like snow, wondering what the divine creature was doing so far from home. Overlooking the village, Alferia's heart ached with the silent wish to see her family just once. A grim line formed on the princess's lips, confirming her resolve to keep her distance for her family's safety. The scene shifted to ancient, snowy peaks that had guarded the continent long before humans laid claim to the land. Legends told of an ancient war between the demon god Heracida and the dragon god Elianrode. Their magic had transformed the continent's center into a dangerous, monster-infested territory, known as the Dark Forest. Every winter, the Elian Empire hunted these monsters to demonstrate the Emperor's power as the kingdom's protector. Arriving at the Marquisate of Krezel, the blonde Princess Alferia observed the bustling preparations for the upcoming hunt. Alferia noted the temporary housing for the dragons, while her companion watched with a curious and focused expression. Alferia smiled and refused the idea of special treatment, preferring to stay in a simple, ordinary room in the castle. With a sharp command, Alferia turned toward the horizon, her expression hardening as she set about her duties. High above, a purple dragon glided over the massive encampment as Emperor Darian III finally arrived. A close-up revealed the Emperor's stern, scarred face and his cold, calculating gaze. The Emperor scanned the crowd, spotting the princess standing among the commoners. As the festivities began, Alferia felt the Emperor's oppressive attention, her expression growing wary in anticipation of their meeting. A guard's voice rang out, announcing the formal arrival of His Majesty and the third princess. A clamor of noise and whispers erupted as the Emperor and Alferia made their grand entrance before the bowing nobility. While the Emperor smiled and conversed with the guests, amassed Alferia's side, feeling bored and detached. Holding her drink, Alferia lamented that these repetitive social obligations had already consumed several days of her schedule. The blonde princess reflected on her hollow role, feeling like a doll filling the Empress's empty seat. She let out a soft sigh as she crossed her arms, clearly exhausted by the endless festive performance. With a heavy thud, a man in a red cloak landed heavily in front of the surprised princess. In a comical flashback, the Emperor embraced a shocked Alferia while complaining about their lack of quality time together. Back in reality, Alferia forced a polite smile despite her internal frustration with the Emperor's public theatrics. Alferia wished for the hunt to begin as she poured a drink, while the Emperor prepared to introduce a distinguished knight. The blonde princess was surprised to hear the name Beatrice Aquitaine, a legendary figure among the knights. Narrative text noted that Beatrice was the groundbreaking and sole female knight in the Empire's elite 4th Legion. Amidst blooming flowers, the dark-skinned, gray-haired Beatrice saluted her emperor with firm military discipline. The emperor tasked Beatrice with mentoring Alferia, trusting the veteran knight to guide his daughter during the hunt. Alferia warmly invited Beatrice to Hyacinth Castle, hoping to forge a friendly connection with her stern new mentor. Beatrice remained silent and cold, her severe demeanor a stark contrast to the princess's eager and friendly approach. With a swift turn, Beatrice turned her back on the princess, abruptly ending their brief conversation. Alferia watched her leave, confused and hurt by the knight's sudden and blatant display of social distance. The scene shifted, with a pointing gesture questioning if Alferia had committed some unnoticed behavioral error. A troubled-looking, brown-haired man in a military uniform crossed his arms, discussing a reconnaissance mission. He explained that the Emperor had ordered the strongest dragons to immediately scout the dangerous dark forest, as the Emperor demanded that she remember her origins and his authority over her future. Alferia felt cornered. The Emperor ignored her protests, decreeing that Lady Beatrice would accompany the princess on this high-risk mission. A gray-haired man smiled and wished the princess luck as she prepared to depart for the forest. In the stables, the gray-haired knight looked back with a sharp, determined gaze as the princess called out to Beatrice Aquitaine. The gray-haired knight introduced herself and her mount, confirming her role as the princess's escort for the mission. Alferia appeared visibly nervous, her sweat-beaded face revealing her deep anxiety about working with such a cold partner. The princess wondered if Beatrice was genuinely unwell or simply hostile, while the white dragon observed their interaction. Beatrice turned, addressing the princess with a stern expression that permitted no casual friendliness. The gray-haired knight bluntly refused, stating she only wished to maintain a professional working relationship. Alferia asked if the knight hated her, but Beatrice remained aloof, leaving the princess to draw her own conclusions. Beatrice explained the harsh reality of her life, having had to sacrifice the chance of marriage to fulfill her duties as a knight. With a sharp gaze, Beatrice pointed out that Alferia's knighthood was purely a result of her birth. With a low growl, Cisrelia bristled at the insult, forcing Alferia to restrain her protective dragon. Beatrice mounted her winged companion, preparing to lead the scouting party and ignoring the lingering look of hurt on the princess's face. "Beatrice, acknowledged the formal nature of their mission, focused entirely on the duty at hand rather than friendship. Alferia climbed into her saddle. The two dragons took to the air, flying over the vast, snow-dusted forest toward the heart of the dark forest. In a comical moment, Sis suggested a lethal solution for the night, leaving Alferia shocked at his vocabulary. Riding ahead, Beatrice coldly decided she had no need to show any sensitivity to the princess's personal feelings or motivations. As the journey continued, Alferia paused, a brief and quiet flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Cisrelia soared above the dark forest as Alferia observed the strange, shifting colors of the ancient trees. With a low rumble, Cis warned that the forest monsters would attack if their young were disturbed. Alferia asked if any other dragons lived nearby, but Cis noted they all stayed in the distant, deep mountains. The dragon suddenly made a sharp discovery, his eyes widening as he sensed something unsettling in the forest. Spotting a blood-stained creature on the forest floor, Alferia looked down and cried out, seeing the dead mother beast lying in a pool of blood. Alferia urgently ordered Cis to land immediately. With a quick leap, the princess jumped down from her dragon. Examining the scene, Alferia realized the mother beast had died days ago protecting her young, while Beatrice watched silently from the side. After discovering a massive claw print, Alferia decided to use her previously learned skills to track the predator. Measuring the huge footprint with her hand, Alferia realized they were hunting a creature of truly terrifying size. Cis warned that a demon larger than himself existed in this forest, powerful enough to crush them with ease. Beatrice insisted they find the beast immediately, as its presence made the upcoming imperial hunt far too dangerous. Considering the risk, Alferia suggested sticking to the reconnaissance mission rather than engaging such a deadly threat. With a heavy rumble, Beatrice stood firm, declaring her unwavering commitment to her knightly duty. The gray-haired knight turned to the princess, sternly demanding that Alferia approach her mission with more vigor. Beatrice warned that hesitating over trivial matters would ultimately cost the princess her position and the respect of others. With a swift turn, Beatrice abruptly left, ignoring Alferia's attempt to call her back. With a sudden whoosh, Beatrice flew off, leaving the princess reaching out a hand in a futile attempt to stop her. With a soft whistle, Beatrice disappeared into the clouds, much to the princess's frustration and the dragon's confusion. Cis asked for their next move, while Alferia stared in the direction the knight had gone, her patience finally at its limit. The blonde princess glared at the horizon, her eyes hardening as she prepared to take matters into her own hands. In a flashback, Beatrice recalled overhearing gossip about female knights resigning their posts to get married. The gray-haired knight felt a deep, silent resentment, reflecting on the struggles of female knights who could barely survive outside of ceremonial roles. Beatrice recalled standing before the nobility, determined to defend the position she had fought so hard to earn. Her inner monologue revealed a desperate need to uplift the pride of all female knights through her own flawless performance. Beatrice admitted she feared the princess's perceived incompetence would jeopardize everything, that women had sacrificed everything to build. Looking at Alferia, Beatrice realized she had chosen to hate the princess long before they ever met. A close-up on the knight's wide eyes revealed her sudden terror at her own misguided arrogance. Beatrice admitted to herself that she wasn't actually protecting her pride, but had been blinded by her own self-consciousness. As a massive panther closed in on her, Beatrice realized she had been lost in her own self-obsession. With a sudden whoosh, Alferia swooped down on Cis, ordering the dragon to prepare a fatal breath attack. With a rhythmic creak, Alferia drew her bow, furious that Beatrice's recklessness had endangered their mission. With a violent roar, Alferia's arrow struck the monster's eye, blinding the beast with deadly precision. Alferia called to her dragon, preparing for a final strike to end the threat for good. Cisrelia stood ready, the dragon's power surging as it prepared to unleash a devastating blow on the predator. A massive wave of light engulfed the panther, the dragon's breath completely annihilating the monster in a single, brilliant flash. With a heavy footfall, Alferia landed beside the trembling Beatrice, the immediate danger finally over. The proud knight looked up with a broken expression, offering the princess a sincere and humble apology. Beatrice bowed her head in deep shame, apologizing to everyone for her arrogance and near-fatal mistake. The knight reflected on how her obsession with status had made her forget what was truly important. The scene shifted back to the palace, where the brilliant lights of a grand celebration filled the hall. Surrounded by flowers, Alferia stared into her drink, her thoughts still on the intense events of the hunt. A concerned voice noted her somber mood, pulling the princess from her deep and quiet reflection. Interion stood before her in his ornate uniform, his presence commanding as someone called his name. Alferia greeted Interion, who explained he was late due to handling the complex administrative affairs of the hunt. Interion gently pressed the princess, asking why she had looked so troubled when he first saw her. Alferia managed a weary smile and took a sip of her wine, trying to mask her inner fatigue. Not far away, the brown-haired knight looked utterly drained, overwhelmed by the endless and exhausting demands of the event. Beatrice lowered her head in shame, and Elfin remained equally silent. During the amber sunset debriefing at the camp, the red-haired commander reprimanded the entire group, despite the various variables in the mission and the explicit instructions that the princess was to be kept safe and sound each night. A heavy death knell rang out when the commander pointed out the ironic fact that the princess had instead protected her so-called elite mentors. With a solemn expression, she was informed that she was banned from the upcoming hunts due to her dragon being injured in battle. Beatrice accepted this light punishment, grateful that her previous diligence had saved her from immediate and complete dismissal, displaying firm discipline. Amidst the palace lights, Alferia swirled her wine, noticing that news of the incident had already begun to circulate. The blonde princess raised her glass, determined to remain unfazed by the growing gossip and social frustrations. Spotting a new guest, Alferia asked Interion to introduce her to the silver-haired man standing across the hall. Interion identified him as Count Aquitaine, a former cavalry commander and Dame Beatrice's father. Count Aquitaine observed the princess from across the grand ballroom, offering a polite and profound smile. After seeing Beatrice's father's hearty and friendly grin, Alferia gained a better understanding of Beatrice's ambitions. Alferia and the Count exchanged a polite toast, while Interion observed the interaction with a quiet, stern face. He reflected on the friction between Alferia's approach and his own composed handling of conflict. Through the refraction of his wine glass, the princess seemed to be navigating the social scene with a newfound, graceful confidence. Interion wondered whether her noble nature was innate or simply a result of her high royal bloodline. Interion decided to leverage Alferia's unique qualities, greeting her as she enjoyed the party. The blue-haired man approached with a calm demeanor, asking if her conversation with the Count was pleasant. Elvira explained that her frustration stemmed from his daughter, even though the Count himself was a polite and professional nobleman. Surrounded by glittering jewels, Interion encouraged her to accept the Count's goodwill as a subtle apology. The two walked together through the ornate hall, their presence drawing the attention of the whispering court members around them. Alferia paused to mention that Intirion's advice at Hyacinth Castle had proven to be very helpful. Surrounded by lush clusters of white flowers, the princess expressed her sincere gratitude for the black-haired man's guidance. Faced with the princess's sudden and heartfelt gratitude, Interion remained silent. Under the light of the full moon, the blue-haired man invited the princess outside for some fresh air. As they walked, Interion asked her why she would seek the winter cold in the middle of a social event. Interion suggested that the harsh judgment might be more painful than the winter air itself. Alferia revealed that the walk was her idea, as she wanted a private moment to speak with him directly. They entered a quiet, blue-lit conservatory. As the blue-haired man began to steer the conversation toward a new topic, a sharp pause suddenly occurred, filling the air with unstated tension. Interion faced her directly, addressing the princess by name, his expression unreadable in the deep shadows of the conservatory. Against the imperial backdrop, Interion asked a shocking question. Had she ever thought about becoming empress? Alferia, caught off guard, questioned his motives and stated that she knew her status was far below such lofty ambitions. Interion bluntly stated that Alferia was more suited for the throne than his own sister-in-law. Alfira, surprised and blushing, protested that she couldn't marry the emperor, a man she had never met. Interion stressed that becoming the woman with the highest power was the only priority. Breaking into a nervous sweat, Alferia asked if his previous help was just part of a political scheme, and if this was the real reason he had been helping her all along. Interion stood tall in silence, the blue moonlight outlining his sharp profile as the tension between them reached its peak. Interion contemplated his own motives alone, a memory of a dark-haired figure flashing through his mind. Alferia, shocked by his cold logic, accused him of using her like a friend just for his own plans. The princess, with a hurt expression, pointed out that it felt like he was just treating her as a tool. Interion looked down at his hands and calmly admitted that her assessment of his utilitarian perspective might be correct. He explained his cold philosophy, believing that everyone within the empire was nothing more than an essential cog in a machine. Interion proposed a formal alliance, leaving the princess bewildered by his sudden and blunt declaration. Enraged by the comparison, Alferia firmly stated that she would not treat people as tools to achieve her goals. Interion smiled brightly and condescendingly told the princess that her idealized view of the situation was not the truth. A memory of a melancholic woman surfaced, highlighting the heavy burden of being the sole survivor in this cruel world. In a disturbing vision, blood-stained, withered hands appeared, hinting at a past filled with violence and silent loss. A lone figure walked toward a distant castle, accompanied by a vow to live only to remember the dead. The scene faded into a textured darkness, leaving the princess's future and her alliance with Interion completely uncertain. In a boneyard wilderness, Alferia reflected on her responsibilities and the persistent flaws in her reasoning. The scene switched to the bright, open sky above the sprawling tents of the imperial hunting camp, where Interion explained the precious resources of the dark forest to Alferia. As merchants gathered for the hunt, Alferia remained silent while the black-haired man described the high value of fire-resistant wood and demonic materials. Observing from above, Alferia noticed that despite their awkward conversation the day before, Interion still looked remarkably composed. She watched him closely, wondering if he could truly feel genuine emotions. Alferia decided to act as if nothing was wrong, preparing to mount her horse before the mission began. Alferia readied herself for the hunt, sitting tall on her horse, prepared to face the dangers of the forest. A thunderous cheer erupted as the winter demon hunt officially began among the imperial tents and knights. On the royal platform, the leaders watched as they prepared to enter the dark forest. With a powerful whoosh, a dragon descended from the sky, luring out a massive shadow demon. The aerial forces coordinated their attack, proving that even the most powerful ground demons couldn't withstand the dragons from above. The narrator warned that the brutal rules of the jungle could change unpredictably deep within the forest. Alferia observed the smaller demons in the sky, noting the heavy burden the dragon riders carried. With a sharp, piercing sound, Alferia skillfully shot down a flying demon with a precise arrow. Nearby soldiers were impressed by the blonde princess's archery, recognizing her as an expert with the bow. Alferia soared on her white dragon, ordering Saria to cover her back while she aimed at the enemies ahead. Framed in a golden border, the blonde princess drew her longbow with deadly confidence and perfect aim. Overlooking the bloody victory, Alferia felt relieved that the cold weather masked the foul stench of the dead creatures. Alferia curiously examined a tusked demon deer while a soldier excitedly called out to her. A brown-haired soldier praised her excellent performance, asking if she would bring the kill back to Hyacinth Castle. In a comedic moment, the small white dragon Saria dragged a massive dead bear through the clouds. As the soldier marveled at the immense value of the kill, Alferia gave a nervous, sweaty smile. Highlighting the economic reality, the soldier pointed out that a bear pelt of that size was nearly priceless. Alferia consulted her dragon, who suggested they skip the skinning process and just eat the meat. Alferia drew a sharp knife, preparing to handle the massive kill herself, much to the surprise of her companions. A flustered soldier quickly intervened, pleading with the blonde princess to leave such dirty work to the professional hunters. Alferia blushed in embarrassment, realizing her pragmatic survival instinct instincts were too extreme for her royal identity. The blonde princess awkwardly held the pelt while the soldier looked on, bewildered by her unexpected behavior. In a light-hearted exchange, the group joked that the dragon Saria wanted to eat the creature's innards. The scene then switched. As evening approached the camp, the sky above the castle walls was clear. Alferia was surprised by the lavish feast prepared for the hunting party in the middle of nowhere. The blonde princess stood tall in her uniform, ready to join the high-ranking nobles for the evening meal. During the meal, Alferia attributed their success to her dragon, but Interayon insisted that the master should also share the glory. A brown-haired man, sitting between them, was sweating profusely from the palpable tension at the table. Interayon leaned closer to Alferia, advising her to focus on replenishing her energy for the difficult road ahead. Interayon warned that the environment would become harsher and that they might encounter the rare and dangerous Yavuz dragon. Alferia reflected on the rarity of these creatures, noting that the First Legion possessed only two. A silhouette of the Yavuz dragon showed its powerful steel claws and scales used for both attack and defense. Interayon explained that despite the creature being known for being fierce and nearly untamable, it had to be captured. The black-haired man noted that the Empire couldn't breed them because the two remaining Yavuz were both male. Alferia looked worried, concerned that subduing such a powerful beast was easier said than done. Deep down, Alferia suspected that Interion's concern was merely a calculation to make her the next empress. As Interayon rose from the banquet table, a sharp sound of standing up was suddenly heard. This surprised the blonde princess. The black-haired man walked directly toward her, inviting the princess for a walk so they could speak privately. As the two sat side by side on a wooden bench under the open sky, a heavy silence filled the air. Alferia, looking troubled, wondered when they would ever overcome the awkwardness between them. Interayon broke the silence, looking away as he admitted that he valued the blonde princess highly. Interayon reflected on his past decisions, insisting that his calculated actions were the best possible outcome that could have been achieved. The blonde princess, flustered by his unexpected praise, turned her head away, her face flushing red. The blonde princess sat alone on the bench, struggling to define herself in Interion's calculated worldview. Recalling their previous walk, Alferia determined that she had never truly seen herself as a mere political tool. A tense rustle was heard as Interayon unexpectedly began to speak of his older brother's unfortunate death in the past. Interayon explained how witnessing death at a young age made him realize the insignificance of individual lives. He looked at the princess with a rare smile, finding a strange kinship in her self-sacrificing nature. While discussing the necessity of power, the two reflected on the heavy burden of survival. As Interayon mocked the current emperor's merciful nature, a low, doomsday-like sound suddenly rang out, as nothing spoke of mercy more than the shadow of an impending trial. Interayon revealed his identity as an illegitimate son, explaining the political instability surrounding the current throne in Kyle. Alferia listened intently, finally understanding the true depth of Interion's obsession with a powerful guardian dragon. Interayon leaned forward, admitting that his pursuit of power stemmed from a desperate desire to escape a violent death. Set against a backdrop of white flowers, Interion's calm exterior concealed the deep motivations driving his alliance with the princess. Interayon compared Alferia's nature to that of a dragon, appreciating the free spirit she brought to their calculated partnership. The princess froze for a moment as Interayon urged her to stop doubting her own worth and abilities. Alferia swallowed her remaining hesitation and responded softly, tentatively accepting his rare personal encouragement. The atmosphere shifted as the emperor's arrival was announced, prompting a reflection on the heavy burden borne by survivors. The sound of steady footsteps echoed as the scene transitioned, marking the beginning of a defining new chapter. Leaving the meeting, Alferia faced the challenges ahead with the heavy knowledge Interayon had revealed. A playful transition introduced the dragon Saria preparing for a meal in the clouds above the hunting camp. An intense and focused gaze was heard as the hungry dragon stared at a juicy piece of roasted meat. Recalling past unpleasantness, the white dragon Saria allowed the emperor to feed her, though she still maintained her pride. A green-scaled dragon approached a smaller red companion, striking striking up a conversation about the coveted forest game. The green dragon generously offered some meat, eliciting an excited reaction from the hungry red-scaled beast. Satisfied chewing and swallowing sounds were heard as the red dragon happily devoured the food, with Saria watching nearby. The Emperor's guardian dragon, Calgadon, wore a superior expression, questioning why anyone would share food with a non-speaking beast. The massive Calgadon roared at Saria, asserting his noble status as the imperial mount. The majestic white dragon's tone softened, admitting that he actually enjoyed being treated with kindness and respect. Saria shared a portion of her meat with Calgadon, marking a rare moment of friendship between the dragons. Cheerful laughter was heard as the two creatures shared their meal. The blonde princess happily waved and called for her dragon Saria, who responded with an affectionate cry. Alferia shared the good news that the camp was abuzz with praise for the delicious meat they had hunted. Aria looked very pleased with herself, radiating a bright energy, confirming that she too had enjoyed the hunt. Happy laughter was heard as the scene faded, with the dragons and their companions enjoying a moment of peace among the others. 2 days passed peacefully, with dragons soaring above the towering pines of the demon-infested forest. Taking advantage of a lull in monster activity, the Imperial Knights took a short break and conversed. Suddenly, a low growl was heard. With a thunderous roar, a massive Yavuz dragon appeared in the iron mining area, signaling imminent danger. Recalling Tyrion's earlier warning, Alferia prepared for the daunting task of capturing this fierce and rare creature. The brown-haired knight rushed to Alferia, relieved to have found her as they prepared for the capture. The sound of clanking metal was heard as a heavy golden chain was revealed, specifically designed to subdue the powerful Yavuz. The brown-haired man displayed the golden magic chain, explaining its superior quality and strength compared to standard tools. Looking at the massive silhouette, the princess noted that this golden restraint was far superior to any she had ever seen. The chibi-style brown-haired knight explained that standard muzzles were useless against the Yavuz's astonishing physical strength. Interion and another knight carried the heavy chain, while Alferia realized their team was expanding for this mission. Alferia agreed on the necessity of a larger team, acknowledging that 2 people alone could not be expected to capture a Yavuz. The tall, gray-haired knight stood with his back to the princess, his presence marking him as a veteran. A crisp sound was heard as the gray-haired man greeted the princess, the gray-haired knight displaying a stern demeanor. Alferia greeted him politely, formally meeting the legendary and stoic dragon knight known as Sir Jed. As the three stood together, a heavy silence fell, the air thick with professional tension and unspoken caution about the plan. Sir Jed bluntly refused, prompting an angry outburst from Pelecidai. He laughed and explained Sir Jed's nickname, the Silent Knight, to the flustered blonde princess. The brown-haired knight noted that Sir Jed's cold behavior toward Alferia was making the royal atmosphere unusually awkward. Under a cloudy sky, the team focused on their high-stakes mission, hoping for a bit of luck. High above the forest, Alferia and Saria spotted the silhouette. Alferia asked her white dragon if she had ever fought a rare Yavuz dragon before. Saria explained that these creatures usually avoided her kind, making direct encounters very rare for ancient white dragons. The ever-optimistic Alferia wondered if they could resolve the conflict through peaceful dialogue. Saria made a skeptical sound as they descended through the clouds, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Accepting reality, the dragon began to dive toward the iron mining area below. With a heavy, bone-shaking stomp, a massive creature landed, marking the start of the dangerous hunt. Alferia gripped the reins, her face pale with shock at the sheer scale of the threat. A low, sinister growl echoed from the woods as the black dragon revealed itself to the royal party. A thunderous, earth-shaking roar was heard as the Yavuz dragon appeared, and a nearby soldier confirmed its presence. Saria assessed the beast's immense power, noting they had to capture it alive without using her deadly breath. Sir Peasant shouted a warning against using dragon breath as he prepared to have his own mount launch a direct attack. With a confident smirk, the brown-haired man called out to his partner. Zeograt to engage. An agile, smaller dragon zipped through the air at incredible speed, acting as a decoy for the larger beast. A piercing sizzle suddenly rang out as lightning struck the battlefield, surprising the knights with its unexpected elemental power. With a quick, sharp whoosh, Saria dove down, grateful for the opening the decoy provided. Alferia, focused and determined, prepared to deploy the heavy golden magic restraints to bind the ferocious creature. Realizing the Yavuz was watching, Alferia aimed carefully, knowing she had only one chance to secure the chains. The golden chains clicked shut around the beast's neck as Alferia cheered for the successful capture. Saria looked back at her master with an expression of extreme concern, catching the blonde princess off guard. The dragon's expression shifted to one of comical fear, warning that peace negotiations were officially off the table. A powerful whoosh suddenly rang out as a whirlwind erupted, catching the airborne Alferia by surprise. Alferia watched in awe as a massive vortex of wind magic enveloped the target, pinning it in place. The gray-haired Sir Jed watched as his dragon, Shankarel, unleashed its unique skill to support the mission. As the dragon was successfully subdued, a nearby voice urged the princess to prepare for the final binding. The team aimed to capture the beast alive to ensure a future contract with an imperial knight. Tension soared as the Yavuz regained consciousness, turning its predatory gaze on the unsuspecting. Sir Placidect, a hand yanked on the reins as a desperate warning cry was heard, seeing through the dragon's trap of feigning injury. A heavy, ominous heartbeat was heard as the dragon's shadow fell over Placidect, signaling his imminent peril. Narration from an ancient book warned that the Yavuz's physical strength far exceeded human limits. Paleside watched with grim focus as the narrator cautioned to never let the beast get above you. The strategic advantage became clear as the narrator explained why the Yavuz always seeks the highest altitude. The black dragon folded its wings and initiated a high-speed dive, turning its massive body into a weapon. Using its incredible weight, the creature fell faster than any other dragon to crush the target below. The shadow of failure loomed over the battlefield as the predator prepared to snuff out its prey's life. With a panicked whoosh, Alferia screamed for Peasant, witnessing the disaster unfold from above. Thinking fast, the blonde princess ordered Sir Jed to buy them time while she prepared to counterattack. Sir Jed hesitated in surprise, while Alferia drew her bow, determined to save her comrade at any cost. With a rhythmic clinking sound, Alferia's arrows bounced harmlessly off the dragon's impenetrable steel scales. The blonde princess spurred her mount, calling for Saria, preparing for a more direct and dangerous course of action. Peasant, from his vulnerable position, prepared for a last-ditch strike against the diving monster. Saria rushed forward, her white wings glowing with intense blue mana, and intercepted the falling beast. Alferia ordered her dragon to throw the massive creature down, using their combined strength to turn the tide of battle. In a comedic turn, the party recovered, and Alferia checked on the disheveled but alive brown-haired knight. A sharp groan was heard as the Yavuz was finally pinned to the ground by the heavy golden chains. Saria circled above, looking down on their chaotic but successful capture as a victorious whoosh was heard. Alferia watched as Peasant confirmed the magic restraints were working, rendering the rare dragon helpless. Peasant doubted their ability to hold the beast, pointing out that Zeograt's thunder attack was limited to 2 uses. A quick, sharp whoosh was heard as the blonde princess navigated the sky during the intense aerial engagement. Alferia noticed a sudden shift in the atmosphere as the silhouette of a white dragon glided high in the clouds. A wave of magic confirmed the whirlwind was the work of Shankarel, the dragon belonging to Peasant. The massive black dragon loomed over Sir Jed, while the gray-haired knight remained focused on the dangerous task. Peasant shouted a desperate warning to Sir Jed as the predatory Yavuz was in position for a fatal blow. A thunderous, earth-shaking explosion was heard as a concentrated blast of blue magic struck the target with incredible force. Alferia recognized this control magic, recalling her mentor's teachings as she watched the battle unfold in shock. Beads of sweat formed on Alferia's face as she wondered how Sir Jed could possess the bloodline required to cast such magic. The blonde princess refocused on the mission, calling for Saria to intervene before the situation spiraled out of control. A shout was heard to finish the mission as the black dragon continued to struggle wildly before the imperial forces. With a heavy, bone-shaking impact, the white dragon slammed into the Yavuz in mid-air, pinning it to the ground. Saria coldly watched the pinned creature, making it clear that her patience had finally reached its limit. The white dragon asserted her dominance, claiming she had no reason to keep the beast alive as humans would. Saria looked down at the black dragon and advised it to behave, choosing survival over a futile struggle. A fearful stutter was heard from the corner of the frame as the outmatched Yavuz trembled before the ancient dragon. The dragon's silhouette glided back to camp as the chaotic conflict finally came to an end. Alferia looked satisfied, though Alferia suspected the two dragons had a rather questionable private conversation during the capture. Alferia thanked the knights for their help, feeling slightly embarrassed about her earlier, more aggressive capture strategy. Palisade, holding the heavy restraints, agreed that leaving them on the dragon was no longer a safe option. Looking at the shackles, Alferia was reminded of Saria's aversion to such items when they were first reunited. The princess looked directly at the Yavuz and asked if it could understand her, prompting a confused expression. The brown-haired Peasant and the gray-haired Sir Jed stood side by side, contemplating quietly under the fading sunset. Peasant reacted to the princess's sudden and unexpected command, his face contorting into an expression of shock. The brown-haired soldier protested, questioning why she would release such a rare and hard-won prize back into the wild. Saria and the black dragon made eye contact, sharing a silent exchange as a series of chirps passed between them. Saria assured the princess that the Yavuz would be loyal and cause no trouble if treated with kindness. A hand tentatively reached out, accompanied by a soft flash of light, marking the beginning of a new, unlikely bond. Elvira smiled warmly, promising that the dragon would grow stronger and smarter after drinking her royal dragon blood. Peasant watched from a distance, amazed that the princess had bonded with the Yavuz without needing a formal magic contract. Peasant turned to Sir Jed, asking if the stoic knight remembered the Empire's ancient and mysterious founding myths. Sir Jed looked straight ahead, coldly warning Peasant that such dangerous topics should never be discussed aloud. Against a decorative backdrop, Alferia contemplated the danger of these rumors, realizing they must contain some truth. As the group settled into the camp for the night, Alferia knelt before the black dragon, gently extending her hand to it. The soldiers let out a rhythmic clamor and whisper as they watched Alferia praise the captured beast for its docile behavior, and Placid smiled. Noticing the noise from the camp, Alferia was tending to the dragon with a pair of borrowed tweezers. Peasant admitted that it was extremely rare to bring back a wild dragon without putting it into a deep sleep. The brown-haired knight noticed a powerful presence approaching their temporary camp, his expression turning into a slight sneer. The group looked toward the horizon as the narrator announced the Emperor's arrival. Under the blood-red sunset, a heavy and ominous thump rang out, and Alferia turned to face the Emperor, who was clad in a red cloak. The princess studied the Emperor's worried face, wondering, was he afraid? And what could cause such fear? A sudden and unsteady staggering sound was heard, and the Emperor, his back to the girl, moved stiffly and unnaturally. Alferia worried that the Emperor loathed her presence, unable to even bear the thought of speaking with her. The princess lowered her head, politely asking if she could accompany him back to the palace after the hunting season. The Emperor coldly refused her, turning away abruptly and declaring that his other knights would handle his security. Alferia felt a sense of unease, realizing the Emperor's public avoidance created an extremely awkward atmosphere. Watching the man's retreating back, the princess recalled his earlier warning with sadness and deep suspicion. Alferia stood in the faint light, her expression unreadable as Saria's swirling white energy surrounded her. Within a floral border, a black-haired man bowed his head with a solemn expression, calling out to his father. The aging emperor, sitting in a dim study, coldly ordered the man to enter while lamenting a deeply unfortunate situation. The narration reflected on the irony of succession, pointing out that the intelligent ones often lack the necessary strong dragon blood. A figure in a deep blue cloak stood before an ornate golden frame, their back to the audience. The narrator revealed a bitter truth. The most suitable and intelligent child did not even possess the royal bloodline. The aging emperor lamented his lack of luck with his children, then summoned the blue-haired Enterion into the study. Enterion, dressed in a blue and white patterned robe, smiled brightly, feeling deeply flattered by his father's words. A close-up of the lower half of the emperor's face emphasized his expectation that his intelligent son would immediately grasp his meaning. Alferia appeared in a stylized silhouette. The text confirmed she had achieved the impossible feat of taming a wild dragon. Enterion looked away with a serious expression, contemplating how such an achievement would normally lead directly to the throne. The emperor expressed his deep anxiety that the empire's most outstanding child did not have his blood running through her veins. Enterion defended Alferia's unwavering loyalty, but the emperor remained skeptical and asked why he could be so certain. As Enterion explained, a panel of Alferia appeared, showing that the princess felt she was unworthy of everything she had received. The emperor listened quietly, his face partially obscured, as he considered his son's defense of the blonde princess. Enterion continued his argument, questioning who would doubt a girl so humble and grateful for her position. Against a background of the sky, Enterion pointed out that none of his siblings could tame a wild dragon as she had. As Enterion cited the Empire's traditions, suggesting they keep her by their side rather than eliminate her, a silhouette of Alferia appeared. The gray-haired emperor fell into thought, seemingly moved by his son's insightful and strategic advice. Satisfied with the report, the emperor offered Enterion a reward for his hard work during the winter hunt. Enterion politely declined, inwardly hiding his true desire to become the second most powerful person in the entire empire. Enterion requested to visit Baroness Royce, which made the emperor realize he hadn't seen the prince's mother recently. A close-up of a blue eye hinted at a hidden motive, as Enterion expressed his certainty that the visit would please her. Enterion bowed respectfully and left, privately worrying that his father feared a marriage between Alferia and Ewan. Enterion reflected on his own cleverness, noting that his earlier advice regarding the princess had successfully dispelled his father's concerns. The prince walked alone through the camp under a starry sky, as white magical fragments drifted in the air. Alferia arrived with the giant Yavuz, and the prince watched her arrival from the ground. Enterion and Alferia looked at each other from opposite ends of the camp, both lost in their own turbulent, secret emotions. A close-up captured Enterion's focused and intense gaze as he watched the blonde princess in the twilight. Alferia smiled warmly, her long golden hair shimmering, as she recalled the successful conclusion of a dangerous mission. The two royals stood in the camp, white magical energy swirling around them, enjoying a moment of peace. Alferia announced that since the winter hunt and the division of spoils were over, she would be returning to the capital. A close-up of the blonde princess highlighted her determination as she prepared to return to her own residence. Alferia returned home, only to be surprised to find she had brought back some unexpected companions. The black dragon watched curiously while Alferia contemplated the political fallout following the destruction of House Yephram. Gazing at the roof, Alferia realized that after the recent rebellion, the dragon would be temporarily without a master. With the sound of a light leap, the princess decided she must personally look after the rare dragon for the time being. As the servants rushed to the entrance to greet the returning princess, panicked shouts rang out. The household servants welcomed Alferia home, and she praised them for keeping the palace gardens so tidy. The butler and maids blushed with joy, deeply grateful for the blonde princess's rare and kind words of encouragement. Alferia observed the servants' excited reactions, wondering if they were happy because she had returned or because of the spoil she brought back. The princess stood before the grand facade of her residence, looking up at the rows of silent, arched windows. The older butler and a maid discuss the princess, calling her a good luck charm despite her lack of formal education. The servants celebrated their comfortable lives, noting that the hunt had brought in a huge profit of 25 gold coins. A maid greedily planned to steal from the treasure and blamed the white dragon's presence for ruining their chance. With a sharp tut, the maid mocked Alferia's commoner background and how she struggled even to write her own name. The brown-haired maid, Liz, excitedly welcomed Alferia back and asked if the princess had enjoyed her time away. Alferia and Liz chatted about the maid's trip home, with Liz joking that she never wanted to take a vacation again. Liz expressed her deep gratitude for the job, feeling very lucky to serve the princess despite her humble origins. A close-up of Alferia's blue eyes showed her watching quietly and intently as Liz declared her complete loyalty to her. As Alferia began to write, preparing to test her maid's declaration of loyalty, a quill pen moved across parchment. Alferia directly asked Liz if she would remain loyal, and the maid swore she would never betray her mistress. Alferia accepted the vow, handing Liz a folded note while watching the girl with a calm, all-knowing expression. Alferia gave Liz a sealed letter, ordering her to deliver it to the Tapaza estate immediately. Alferia stood by the window, watching the carriage depart, reminding Liz to bring back a handwritten reply. The elderly maid, Madame Aiden, noticed Liz's departure and asked the princess why she had suddenly sent her on an errand. Madame Aiden suggested giving the hunting hides to the tanner, but Alferia dismissed the idea with a cold command. The head maid reflected on the princess's sudden change in attitude, wondering why she was no longer so compliant. Madame Aiden insisted that the raw hides would rot, but Alferia cut her off with a sharp call. Alferia turned with a piercing gaze, reminding the maid that she knew more about hunting than anyone. The head maid offered a false apology for her interference, but Alferia rejected her words in a low, firm voice. Standing in the middle of the hall, Alferia demanded an honest answer from the cowering head maid. Alferia promised to give her final instructions later, at which point the maid's face tensed in sudden alarm. The head maid rationalized the princess's anger as professional pride, while Alferia studied a book in the hall. The scene shifts outdoors, where a white carriage stops on a cobblestone path in the hazy light. A woman named Pauline Tapaza introduces herself, smiling as she acknowledges the blonde princess's royal dragon blood. Alferia mentions Lord Intusitha's recommendation while demanding that Baron Rosen explain the unexpected appearance of these newcomers. Baron Rosen explains that while he had anticipated the arrival of Countess Tapaza, the appearance of the church knights was completely unexpected. A woman named Mono introduces herself as a representative from the judicial department of the Church of the Dragon God. Mono explains that she was sent by Mother Asterica to serve the princess, her expression remaining calm and respectful. Alferia smiles and asks Mono to convey her thanks to Mother Asterica upon her return to the church. With a determined glint in her blue eyes, Alferia prepares to handle the pressing matters at hand. Alferia abruptly dismisses Baron Rosen and Madame Aiden from their positions as steward and headmaid. The two servants cry out in shock, desperately trying to prove the value of their service, but Alferia remains unmoved. With a sudden tremor in her voice, Alferia reveals they will be detained for embezzlement and disrespect to the royal family. The princess orders the guards to search their rooms and bring all financial records to her study immediately. A clamor and whispers rise among the staff as the heads of the household fall from power. Against a floral background, Alferia announces that they will remain under scrutiny until her thorough investigation is complete.